The dragon calls out Hadar's name while they fly over the mountain, telling him they are finally getting close to the academy, looking down at the massive campus. The dragon explains that this is the place where Hadar is going to be living and meeting people from now on. Turns out the kid has a crazy backstory. He was left in the mountains as a sacrifice right after he was born, but instead of dying, he got raised by a legendary ancient dragon until he hit age 12. Hadar looks down with a huge smile, wondering what kind of crazy new things are waiting for him in the world below. But the kid doesn't really have any idea about the reality of his situation yet. The world knows about these beings with magic power that's way higher than any other living creature. For thousands of years, these things have been feared as the strongest beings on the planet, and they're known as ancient dragons. Everything started changing back then, specifically when the ancient dragon suddenly remembers what it feels like to be afraid, something he hasn't felt in forever. Looking down, he says the whole thing should be impossible. He notices his own claws are shaking and asks himself why his body is trembling like this, finally realizing he's actually scared of the kid. Flashback to when Hadar was just a baby, abandoned right at the foot of the mountain where the dragon found him. The dragon stares down at the small child, remembering exactly how he looked back then. He recalls the exact second his eyes landed on the infant, who was just sitting there looking up at the massive creature. The dragon couldn't believe he was staring at a tiny human baby. Looking at the basket, he wonders what this feeling is coming from a little kid who isn't even a year old yet. But the dragon quickly realizes the baby is putting out a massive amount of magic power. He's lived for thousands of years, but he admits this is the first time he's ever seen anything like this. Even though he knows his own time is almost up, he can't figure out what's gotten into him to make him feel this way. The dragon looks down with a nervous look, trying to brush everything off by muttering that he's just getting old. He forces a loud laugh and yells out that his age is definitely the reason he's feeling so weird. Still sweating, he tells himself his senses must be glitching out since he's been alive for so long, but he quickly realizes he can't keep thinking such stupid things. He slams his claw into the dirt to focus. The dragon starts thinking back to how humans are actually one of the few races to ever fight dragons as equal. He wonders what it was that allowed them to hold their own against such massive power. Eventually realizing it all comes down to the fact that humans have some of the best magic control in the world. He thinks about how dragons are all about raw quantity, while humans are the exact opposite, focusing on quality and skill. Looking at the baby, he notes that while the kid only has about half as much mana as he does, that's still way more magic power than your average dragon could ever dream of having. The dragon looks at the kid and starts thinking about what might happen if this baby actually grows up to master the crazy high-level magic humans use. Since he's got as much mana as a dragon, he could just spam powerful spells forever, and the dragon realizes he's looking at the birth of a total monster. He decides he has to end it now and swings his claw down, telling the baby it's nothing personal. But he stops his hand just inches away from the kid, unable to do it. Instead of being scared, Hadar just claps his hands and starts laughing, which completely catches the dragon off guard as he stares down in total shock. He looks at the giggling baby and wonders if the kid really thinks they're just playing a game, and the dragon can't help but let out a little laugh of his own. Hadar sits up in his basket and looks on as the giant dragon starts laughing out loud, finding the whole situation pretty funny. He stands out in the forest with his wings wide, laughing even harder now. The dragon gets fired up and shouts that they're definitely gonna raise the kid. He figures since humans think whatever they see first is their parent, he's in a good spot. And if the kid is gonna be a monster, it's better to have him on his side anyway. Looking closer at the baby, the dragon starts thinking about a crazy possibility. Something that used to just be a theory written down on paper, that the kid might actually be able to use magic to make people live longer. The dragon smiles to himself, thinking it's wild that a top-tier beast like him is putting the future in the hands of a baby. The dragon looks down at the little baby and sighs, saying that you really just can't beat old age. He looks at the note left in the basket and realizes the kid's name is Hadar. Standing out in the mountains, the dragon tells the baby he's counting on him from here on out, and that's how the journey starts for Hadar at age 0. Some time passes and the dragon hears something looking over. He sees little Hadar crawling all over a massive pile of gold and treasure in their cave. The dragon asks the kid if he's hungry and tells him to wait just a second, so he starts glowing with this crazy bright light that completely blinds the kid. Hadar absolutely loses it when the giant dragon suddenly turns into a beautiful girl with horns. She picks him up and mentions that her human form magic made her look a lot younger than she thought. The dragon in her new human form offers some milk to the crying baby. Hadar doesn't hesitate and starts eating, which catches her off guard. She looks down at him and mentions he must have been starving, then they both realize something weird is happening as a strange glow starts. Suddenly, the kid just hits a massive growth spurt right in her arms. She asks if he can feel all that dragon power surging through him, and Hadar just takes off like a rocket, leaving her shocked he can even run. The crazy part is that just a second ago, he couldn't even crawl yet, now he's charging out of the cave and heading straight for the woods. The dragon screams for him to stop before he slams into a tree. Hadar lets out a massive cry that's so powerful it actually blasts the entire landscape apart. The dragon can't help but laugh, saying she knew he was special from the moment she saw him. Hadar just gets up and starts walking away, which is pretty crazy since he was just a baby. He's jumping around and cheering while the dragon just screams his name in total disbelief. She asks him what's wrong, but she's mostly just losing it over how he grew up in actual seconds. The dragon tries to calm him down, telling him she gets it and asking him to just wait a second. Moving on to a few years later, the two of them are sitting together in a field, and she looks at him and mentions that it's finally time for him to stop nursing for good. Hadar is 4 years old now and looks super pumped about it, shouting that he's ready. The dragon gives him a little wink and asks if he wants one last drink before they officially finish. The dragon keeps teasing him, but Hadar yells that they actually came out here to study. He looks up and asks her what exactly they're even going to be working on today. The dragon thinks about it for a second and says there are plenty of things they could do, but she finally decides they'll start with magic. Hadar's eyes light up immediately at the idea. He gets super pumped and shouts that he wants to learn the same move his mom uses. She asks if he means dragon's breath, but tells him he's definitely not ready for that. She explains that it's not impossible as long as he can memorize the magic circle, but gives him a reality check, saying even dragons need 2 years just to master that move. Hadar doesn't care about the wait and says he won't really know until he tries. He points out it's only his first year anyway, leaving the dragon looking a bit stressed out. The dragon sighs and says Hadar is a total handful, but she gives in and tells him she'll teach him the move, which makes the kid celebrate as she shows him the specific magic circle needed for the dragon's breath attack. She explains that he needs to picture the image in his head, while focusing his mind on where he wants to shoot, telling him the magic will just activate naturally once he gets the hang of it. Hadar listens closely while she gives him a serious warning to always aim at the sky and never at the ground beneath them. Hadar cheers and agrees, but the dragon looks worried because she knows his raw power could literally split the earth. So the kid closes his eyes and starts focusing hard, picturing the complex circle right in his mind. The air starts shifting and the dragon looks completely shocked as she feels the massive energy building up. Everything starts blowing away as Hadar lets out a huge aura. It's way more power than she expected, and finally he lets it rip, firing a massive beam of energy straight up into the clouds. Hadar shouts out the name of the move as he lets a massive dragon's breath attack rip. A giant beam of light blasts straight into the sky, leaving the dragon in total shock that he pulled it off in just one shot. She stares at the smoke trail and wonders what's going on, because the raw firepower the kid just showed is actually ridiculous. She sighs to herself, thinking about how even she had a hard time learning that move, but there's Hadar celebrating in the background like it was nothing. She looks at him and asks herself if this is even human, realizing she's finally seeing the true scale of the kid's insane magic control. Moving on, Hadar keeps training every day under his mom's guidance, and it's not long before he's shouting out a new move, firing a double dragon's breath that's even bigger than the first one. His mom can barely process how fast he's growing as he devotes every second to his magic, eventually mastering a whole list of spells, like easily making stuff float in the air right in front of him. The ancient dragon is losing her mind because Hadar is controlling sand with crazy precision. She can't believe the kind of magic the kid is pulling off. Everyone in the back is hyped, seeing their theories actually work, and just like that, another 6 years fly by. Hadar is standing in front of this massive, glowing magic circle when he turns to his mom and asks what this huge thing is. He's 10 years old now, and the dragon looks at him, explaining that even with all the mana she has, this is a spell she can't actually pull off herself. So she tells him straight up that this is the very last magic circle she's ever going to teach him. She looks him in the eye and says she wants him to cast lifespan extension magic on her. Hadar completely flips out, asking if she's actually about to die. She just gives him a simple yeah like it's nothing. She shows him her timer, saying she only has 8 years left, which is like 5 years for a human. Hadar is shaking, but he decides that since it's his mom asking, he's going to do whatever it takes to help her. The numbers start ticking up right as Hadar begins the spell. He yells for the lifespan extension magic to activate, and the ancient dragon can't believe the energy she's feeling. The counter hits 1567, and she mentions how her body feels way lighter already. She tells Hadar he's exactly the kind of human she knew he'd be when she chose him, and then she asks if he can keep it coming, basically begging for more magic. Hadar just gives her a confident look and tells her to leave it all to him. After it's all over, the ancient dragon is sprawled out on the grass, saying she's completely stuffed from all that mana. She looks at him and says he grew up to be a sweet kid, and now he's basically her hero. Hadar gets a little shy, telling her he's still got a long way to go before he's that good, but he adds that she's the one who really saved his life, which leaves the dragon totally confused. Hadar starts opening up about his past, telling her he actually still has memories from before he was left in the mountain. He remembers how the adults back then were always calling him a cursed child, and they all looked at him with these really scary expressions. Now that he understands the words they were using, he gets what they meant, but he tells her that if she hadn't stepped in, he wouldn't even be alive today. He looks her right in the eyes and says she's the one who truly saved his life. And the ancient dragon is so moved, she tells him his way with words has gotten impressive, right before she squeezes him so hard he thinks he's gonna die. Flashback to when Hadar was just 12. He's standing there wondering when his mom is coming back after she said she was heading down the mountain. Since she's not back yet, he decides it's time to just get on with his daily routine like he always does. Meanwhile, the ancient dragon is hiking back through the forest, wondering if her boy is being good while she's away. But she starts panicking since she's been gone for 3 days. And she's totally convinced that Hadar is probably feeling incredibly lonely, imagining the poor kid crying his eyes out and begging to know where she's been all this time. The ancient dragon finally makes it back home, walking in and calling out to Hadar, but she's greeted by a massive blast as Hadar yells out "Dragon Flash" and fires off a huge beam. The force of the attack completely blindsides her, sending her papers flying everywhere while she tumbles backward in total confusion. Hadar just smiles and welcomes her back like nothing happened. She's still shaking from the shock and asks what that was, so he explains he just turned his breath into a beam. Since it uses up so much magic, he's been using the move as his main way to train lately. Hadar asks her to join in, but she's just standing there sweating because even she can't fire shots like that. The kid realizes he made a mess, but she's more worried about the important papers he just blasted. Hadar picks one up and asks what it is, while she reminds herself that kids have to leave the nest eventually. She looks at the academy in the distance and tells him that in 1 month, he'll be using that exam ticket. The ancient dragon drops the big news, telling Hadar he's taking the entrance exam for the Sergius Royal Magic Academy. Hadar just gives a nervous smile, realizing he's actually supposed to go once he hits 12. And that's when she explains that going down the mountain to meet other people is a huge deal for his future. The kid starts stressing because he hasn't studied at all, but she tells him he's got nothing to worry about. She's so sure of him that she says if he fails, nobody is passing this year, but she hands him a mock exam book just in case. Hadar takes it, totally confused about why she's so hyped up on him, so he just sighs and tells himself he'll do what he can to get ready. Later on, Hadar gets straight to work at his desk, grinding through the pages while surrounded by books, and suddenly stops right in the middle of a sentence because something caught his eye. He looks at the page and realizes he just did all this work in that other book his mom gave him earlier. Hadar looks through the study materials and realizes the books his mom gave him before were actually way harder than these, so he gets a huge boost of confidence and yells that he can actually handle this, while his mom watches him from the cave entrance. But then she starts thinking back on all the different sides of Hadar she's seen since they first met. A bunch of memories of him as a baby and a little kid flash through her head, and she can't help but think about how cute he's always been. But then it hits her, she stops dead in her tracks as a scary thought crosses her mind, and she starts panicking, realizing that sending Hadar off to the academy means things are going to change. She gets even more stressed out, shaking as she thinks about what this really means for her life because she finally realizes she'll only get to see tiny glimpses of her kids' cute moments from now on. It's been 12 years since she found an abandoned baby on the mountain and turned him into the strongest living thing, and she decides this whole plan is unacceptable. She starts yelling for Hadar to hand over the exam so she can burn it to ashes. Hadar is losing it, yelling at his mom to stop because she's going to make him fail his exam, but she's way too far gone. The kid somehow turned a legendary ancient dragon into the most overprotective parent ever. Later, they're soaring high through the clouds, right over the Zelgius Royal Magic Academy where Dragon Mom slows down, telling Hadar that she can't take him any closer than this. Hadar agrees, saying people would definitely freak out if a dragon showed up, so he'll just use flight magic to land. Mom tells him to stay safe, and he gives a quick shout back before jumping right off her back, yelling that he's officially heading out on his own. He drops through the sky like it's nothing, watching the massive school campus get closer and closer until he looks ahead with this serious face, totally ready for whatever comes next. He finally lands and stands in front of the huge academy gates, thinking about how his brand new life is about to start. He finally makes it to the front of the Zelgius Royal Magic Academy entrance exam venue, the place where everything starts, though he knows a new life only happens if he actually passes today's test. The gate is wide open, but the place is totally empty, making Hadar wonder who he's even supposed to give his ticket to. He stands there looking at the path, trying to figure out if he should just walk inside on his own. He almost takes a step but stops himself, thinking he should probably wait a second before doing anything reckless. If he just wanders in and causes some kind of problem, it could ruin everything. He starts imagining a scary instructor showing up and yelling that the school doesn't have any room for trespassers. If he got kicked out before the exam even started, he knows he wouldn't be able to face his mom ever again. The kid is basically losing it right at the entrance, holding his head and wondering how he's already stuck at the start. Just as he's freaking out, someone walks up and puts a hand on his shoulder, simply saying, "Hey." A girl with glasses and short hair walks up to Hadar, waving her hand as she asks if something is wrong. Hadar explains that he's been looking for the exam reception but couldn't find anyone around, which makes the girl point out that they're actually just at the outer gates, and the real reception is way further inside at the main entrance. He realizes he was stressing for no reason and could have just walked right in the whole time, but then he stops and starts to ask her a question, looking a bit embarrassed while she wonders what he's getting at. She catches on to his vibe immediately and asks if he's actually from the countryside, seeing how clueless he is, and he admits he's from deep in the mountains and has no idea how things work here. The girl says she'll lead the way and tells him to just call her 9X, so he thanks her as they head for the reception window, where the staff member tells them they both ended up being assigned to the same classroom. Hadar looks at his ticket and sees that their exam numbers are only one digit apart, meaning they'll be together for the test. 9X looks down at her exam ticket with a smile, telling Hadar she feels like it's fate that they're together, and they finally reach the door marked for exam room A to start the day. The proctor for the first section is a teacher with glasses who announces that the written exam is about to start. So everyone takes their seats as she tells the front row to start passing the test papers to the back. Hadar hands the stack to 9X while whispering a quick thanks for helping him find the room earlier, and she whispers back that they should probably look out for each other if the questions get too hard. She gives him a quick wink and a wave, telling him they should both do their best on the test, which makes Hadar blush as he stammers out a reply right as the teacher yells for everyone to begin. Once the time is finally up, 9X turns around with a big smile and asks him how he thinks he did, and Hadar just sighs, saying that being in a room like that really messes with your nerves. Hadar looks around the room and thinks about how different the vibe is compared to back home. 9X says it was a total lifesaver that the questions match the practice exams, but when Hadar mentions he finished all 6 subjects, she freezes, giving him this really intense, sweaty look like she can't believe what she just heard. She suddenly snaps and tells him to wait a second, which makes Hadar jump back in surprise. She points out that the exam is only supposed to be 4 subjects total, 2 mandatory ones and 2 electives, and she loses it, demanding to know why he went ahead and did all 6 instead. Hadar just rubs his cheek and gives a nervous smile, saying he was just so restless that he gets yelled at by 9X, who asks if solving extra test subjects is really something you can just do by mistake. Hadar keeps going, saying he couldn't calm down, so he ended up checking his answers 5 times, which leaves 9X completely stunned, since she didn't even have enough time to check her own answers once. 9X tries to shake off the shock and suggests they just head over to the swordsmanship exam, but she looks so depressed that Hadar has to ask if she's even doing okay. As they walk outside, a loud crashing sound caught both of them off guard, making them look over to see a practice sword flying through the air after a crazy hit. The student who just got beat bows and says thanks while the examiner calls for the next person, showing that the second part of the big exam, the swordsmanship test, is officially in full swing. Hadar notices the guy who lost actually looks happy and wonders if they're being graded on their technique, but 9X just sighs and tells him that winning against these examiners is basically impossible. She points out how the whole field is divided into different match booths and explains that every student is being sorted into lines based on their examinee numbers. 9X heads off to her assigned booth, telling Hadar she'll see him later, and he just nods, but as the next student steps up, he pulls out a real sword and tells the examiner he's ready to go. Hadar watches him and realizes the guy actually brought his own weapon, something he didn't think was allowed, and then he looks around and completely loses it because he finally notices that it's not just one person. Every single student in line is holding their own custom blade, some even bragging about how invincible they are. Hadar starts panicking because a sword definitely wasn't on the gear list, making him realize he's the only one standing there empty-handed. He starts sweating, thinking there must be some kind of unspoken rule he missed, and that the entrance exam has basically already started. In his head, he imagines a scary voice calling anyone who didn't bring a weapon total trash, and saying that people who can't even figure out the basics aren't wanted at a place like Zelgia. The examiner calls out for the next person to step into the ring, but Hadar is already on the floor, thinking his chances are totally over. The examiner looks at him and asks what's wrong, seeing the kid is losing it. Hadar explains he forgot his sword and asks if bringing your own was some secret rule he missed. The examiner tells him there's no rule like that and he needs to chill out. He lets him know they have plenty of rentals, so he points Hadar toward a rack of weapons and tells him to just pick whatever looks good. Hadar says he's on it, but a second later, the entire pile of practice swords is snapped and trashed. Hadar stands over the wreckage, thinking he was only taking some light swings. He realizes he can't fight with junk like this, while 9X and the others watch in total shock. Hadar walks back over to the examiner to get his attention. The guy crosses his arms and asks what he needs now, and Hadar looks him straight in the eyes and asks if he can just make his own sword for the test instead. The examiner is completely stunned. Hadar just scratches his head and says it's because none of the rentals can actually handle a real fight. The examiner gives in, saying the rules don't actually ban making your own gear. Hadar thanks him, totally ready to get started. The examiner just smiles to himself, thinking about how there's always some kid trying to find a loophole, so he decides to just sit back and watch. He thinks it'll be pretty interesting to see what the kid actually comes up with, while Hadar stands there thinking. Now that he officially has permission, he starts planning out his build and figures he might as well go all out. He wants a sword that's super sturdy to give him a massive advantage during the fight. He settles on a specific combo and snaps his fingers, and right then the entire room starts shaking. A massive whirlwind of energy kicks up out of nowhere, blowing everything back as the examiner loses it. He yells out in confusion before realizing this isn't just wind, it's a crazy amount of magic power. He stares at the center of the storm, thinking there's no way this is real. Then a bright light flashes, and Hadar is standing there with a massive, sharp black sword that looks like it could cut through anything. The examiner is losing his mind, yelling out that he can't believe Hadar actually made the sword right there. He thinks he might be dreaming because everything about this examinee is just completely insane. Hadar gives the black blade a look and says the weight and sturdiness are exactly what he wanted. The examiner admits he has no clue what's happening anymore, but asks if the kid's ready, so Hadar says yes and gets set for the match. The kid plants his foot firmly on the ground, ready to make his move. Hadar lunges forward with crazy speed, saying he's looking forward to working with the guy. He comes in hot with a massive low swing that creates a huge trail of force. The examiner's eyes sharpen, thinking the kid's movements and speed are actually perfect. He manages to dodge, noting that Hadar is definitely on a different level than everyone else. But he's clearly got a follow-up coming as the match starts heating up. The examiner puts everything he has into a final strike, yelling out to ask if Hadar can even handle his full power as he, elsewhere, 9X finishes up her own business much faster than she thought she would and starts walking through the area, wondering if that kid Hadar has managed to finish his exam yet. She figures he probably spent all his time studying and is likely crying over at the sword exam right now, imagining the poor kid not even being able to lift the heavy blade. But then she spots something that completely catches her off guard. The examiner is actually the one on the ground crying over his broken sword, while Hadar panics and tries to get the man to pull it together, leaving 9X standing there realizing the kid literally made the examiner break down. She asks what he did, but Hadar just awkwardly asks her to show him where to go next, explaining that the guy's sword just snapped the moment they crossed blades, though he thinks it was probably just bad maintenance. 9X knows that's impossible since an examiner from Sergius would never let their gear get that bad. 9X is still pretty suspicious about the whole thing, asking Hadar if he pulled some kind of weird trick on his sword, but Hadar isn't having it. He tells her to stop making stuff up because he literally just made the sword right there using alchemy, so 9X just stands there with her mouth open, totally unable to believe that a kid actually made a weapon like that himself. She asks to check it out for a second and Hadar just shrugs, telling her to go ahead and touch it to see for herself. The second she grabs it, the weight slams her straight into the floor. She screams about how heavy it is while Hadar panics, asking if she's even okay. 9X struggles under the weight, demanding to know what the heck he used to make a sword this heavy. Hadar gets all excited and explains it's actually an orichalcomadamantite alloy, which just makes 9X look even more horrified, stuttering over the names of the legendary metals like she can't even process what she's hearing. He keeps rambling about using atomic transmutation to pull the metal out of thin air, but 9X yells at him to stop dumping so much crazy info on her. She's left completely dizzy from the shock, while the examiner on the ground finally realizes the kid made a blade out of the most rigid metal in existence. The examiner starts sweating as he realizes that if his own sword had actually hit a weapon like that, things would have ended badly. Meanwhile, the craftsman is showing off the blade, calling it his best work yet while Hadar cheers in the background. The examiner tries to play it cool, thinking to himself that any normal sword would have snapped in half no matter who made it, so he starts going over the math in his head. He remembers that the weight of adamantite is completely off the charts. It's actually 15 times heavier than gold, which makes him look over at 9X struggling to hold the weapon. He admits that if the sword is really made of that rare alloy, he can't even imagine how heavy the thing actually is. But then Hadar just starts swinging it around like it's a toy. He casually guesses it's probably around 65 kilos, which makes 9X and the examiner freak out and tell him to stop before he kills someone. The examiner has seen enough and stammers that the match is over. He tells Hadar he passed and needs to just move on to the next part of the exam immediately. Hadar looks a bit confused and suggests that since the examiner's sword broke, it might have been a mistake, so he asks for a rematch. The examiner yells back that there's no way he's fighting him again. He just tells the kid to hurry up and get out of there, mostly because he's terrified Hadar is going to end up breaking even more stuff if he stays. The morning tests finally wrap up as the clock tower bells ring out across the grounds, signaling that it's time for the lunch break. 9X takes a moment to look around at the campus, smiling as she says the name of the school, the Zelgius Royal Magic Academy. 9X looks up at the massive academy building, saying it's like a dream finally being in a place she spent so much time admiring. It's a famous spot after all, known for being the absolute best magic school around in every way possible. She thinks about how every single person who graduates from here goes on to do some pretty legendary stuff out in the world. And Hadar wonders if they could ever end up like those big-shot mages if they actually manage to get accepted. Hadar just slumps over on the bench, looking completely drained as he lets out a quiet, pathetic reply. 9X tries to cheer him up, telling him it's honestly fine since he was the only student who actually beat the examiner. The two of them sit there while she explains that the practical exam wasn't even about winning or losing anyway. But Hadar starts losing it, crying about how he made a terrible impression and got kicked out before he could even try to fix things. He's convinced he's getting a 0, so 9X tells him to just relax and focus on making up for it during the next round while they finally start eating their lunch, and Hadar asks if the magic portion of the exam is coming up next. Hadar asks if he can share some of the food and 9X says it's totally fine. While they eat, Hadar asks if it's true there are 2 different types of exams coming up next, as the other students are already practicing. Hadar explains the first one is a basic attack magic test where you just have to hit a specific target, and mentions the other choice is the creative exam where you have to actually build a magic tool. 9X nods along, confirming that he's got the right idea about the 2 options, so she tells him she's definitely playing it safe by picking the attack magic exam. She figures since the goals are so simple, it's the smartest move to make leaving the 2 of them to sit there in silence for a second. Hadar thinks it over and decides he's actually going to go for the creative exam instead, but 9X admits she's not actually any good at making magic tools herself. She gives him a skeptical look, wondering why he'd pick the more difficult path, until she realizes what he's up to and asks if he's really just doing it for the extra credit. There's a huge 30-point bonus available for that specific exam, which is just too much of a reward for him to ignore. Hadar says he can't pass that up because he needs to make up for the points he lost in the last round. 9X asks him if he's really sure that picking an exam just for the points is a good idea. Hadar talks with his mouth full, asking why it would be a problem since he needs the score, but 9X explains that even with the bonus, the grading is totally up to whatever the examiner feels like giving out. She warns him that it's going to be way harder to get a high score than he thinks. Hadar is totally locked in now, shouting that this is all for his grades. He knows he's on thin searching for any advantage, so he has to take the path that gives him every possible point, which leaves Cecilia looking a bit awkward. Seeing how intense he's getting about the whole thing, she just tells him she's not going to say anything else about it, but she does give him one last piece of advice. She tells him not to go building any magic tools that don't make any sense, since that would just make things hard on the examiners. Hadar gets a little defensive, asking what she even thinks he is. He promises he wouldn't make something useless like that, and then realizes they're about to head off to their different testing areas. He stops for a second and mentions that he actually hasn't even introduced himself to her yet, so she goes first, giving him a wink and saying her name is Cecilia. She tells him she actually had a good time hanging out with him today, and he smiles back, finally introducing himself as Hadar. He tells her he was really glad she was down to just talk to him so normally. Hadar says he really hopes they end up being classmates after this is all over. Cecilia thinks it's funny and teases him, saying it sounds like he thinks he's already passed for sure. He lets out a quick shout, telling her she better not start twisting his words around like that. After they part ways, the 3rd exam finally kicks off. An examiner stands in front of the group and starts going over the details for both the standard magic test and the creative one. The examiner looks out at the classroom and sighs because there are barely any students again this year, which gets a frustrated reaction from someone in the back. And it turns out they're actually pretty stressed since they went through all the trouble of negotiating with the principal for a special bonus system just to get more people to show up. Hadar catches on immediately and realizes the whole creative exam was just a desperate move to attract a crowd, though he admits the teachers have it pretty rough too. But the examiner clears their throat to get everyone's attention again, saying they're going to go over the final exam details one last time. The goal is simple. Everyone has exactly 1 hour to take the magic stone they were given and turn it into a working magic tool. There's a whole pile of extra parts and materials at the back of the room, and the examiner tells them they can grab whatever they need to get the job done. Hadar takes one look at the stone he was given and can tell the quality is basically trash, which means his options for what to build are looking pretty limited, but he decides to flip his thinking. He realizes that if he can manage to make something super advanced using such a low-grade stone, he'll definitely lock in a high score and probably get some massive extra points for being creative with the bad materials. He knows it won't be easy to make up for how badly he failed the swordsmanship exam earlier, but he's still confident he can pull off a pass. Cecilia mentions there's one more thing on her mind, smiling as she says that school is definitely going to be a blast. But the examiner cuts through the chatter and tells everyone to start. Hadar locks in, telling himself he's going to pass no matter what happens next. The scene shifts to the staff room the very next day. The male examiner is pointing at some papers, asking the female teacher if she's actually sure about this one kid, and she tells him there's zero mistake, saying the whole thing is basically burned into her brain forever. She points out that while most kids struggle to hit a 65, Hadar got a perfect score on all 4 subjects, and even aced the optional ones she graded out of curiosity. It gets even crazier because during the sword exam, he apparently created a legendary alloy sword out of nowhere, and swung it around with one hand like it was a toy, leaving the two of them totally drained. The examiner is speechless, while the teacher wonders if the kid is even human since his stats are hitting 80,000. Just then, another teacher slams the door open and yells for them to listen up. The examiner snaps, asking what's going on now while the teacher just hopes for the best, as the newcomer shows off a device and explains that this specific magic tool was built by a student during yesterday's test, leading to the two of them looking completely finished, their minds totally blown. The teacher in the lab coat is losing his mind, screaming that the tool is actually a gravity manipulation device. He can't believe it's real and knows it has to be that kid's doing, leaving the female teacher smiling as she asks if it's cool to give the student a full 100 points for creativity instead of the usual 30. The examiner is totally over it, yelling that she can give him 10,000 points for all he cares since the kid is a scholarship student anyway. And just like that, Hadar passes the exam with the highest score the Zelgius Academy has seen since it was first built. But turns out, right up until the moment the results were officially posted, the guy at the center of it all was completely spiraling. Hadar is freaking out, asking himself why he only applied to one school and worrying he'll be stuck with nowhere to go if he fails. While Cecilia is cheering about her dream coming true, it turns out Hadar's stress was for nothing. But that's a story for later. Fast forward to 2 days after the big announcement. The scene moves to the Zelgius Royal Magic Academy cafeteria where things are finally starting to settle down, and Hadar walks in with his food tray, noticing it's pretty empty since only the new students are around, so he can finally just eat in peace. 2 food trays clink together as 2 people try to grab the same seat. Hadar and Cecilia both jump back, shouting in surprise when they realize who they just ran into. Hadar tells her since she's at the school, she must have passed the exam too, making Cecilia smile and blush. Cecilia says that just passing doesn't cover it, because what he did is a way bigger deal than that, which has Hadar asking why she's acting so formal, but she insists she couldn't possibly talk to him casually anymore. She points out that he's one of only 3 scholarship students who made the cut, placing him on a totally different level for getting such a crazy score, though Hadar just hates the weird attitude. Hadar starts yelling for her to go back to the way she was during the entrance exam, and Cecilia just giggles. Turns out she was just teasing him, but Hadar is totally drained and tells her to give him a break already. Moving on, Hadar's eyes wander over to some flyers posted up on the hallway wall. Hadar spots a flyer on the wall calling out to the students of Zelgius. It's an ad for a 1-day internship at a construction company where they can learn top-tier building skills. Sitting at lunch, Hadar mentions that his mom actually said something about this kind of thing, which triggers a memory of the ancient dragon telling him that school is all about doing extra stuff. He tells Cecilia that his mom wants him to experience as much as possible for his future. And when Cecilia says his mom sounds like a great person, Hadar just smiles and agrees. He starts bragging about how she's the strongest person in the world, making Cecilia laugh a little as she thinks it's funny how highly he thinks of his own parent. She thinks he's being really cute and clearly loves his mom a ton, but the reality is that his mom actually is the strongest being on the entire planet. Hatter admits that growing up way out in the mountains makes it hard to even imagine working at a real company. So Cecilia points out the internship flyer again and suggests he just give it a shot, especially since pre-enrollment students can sign up too. That's all the encouragement Hatter needs. He stands up suddenly and says he's finally made a choice, and with a huge smile, he announces he's definitely applying for that one-day internship at the construction company. Cecilia tells him to go for it, but warns him not to do anything crazy like he did back at the entrance exam, which catches the attention of a blonde girl nearby. Hatter feels someone watching him and glances over to the side. He sees a really pretty girl with long blonde hair walking past their table and heading toward the exit. He starts blushing a little as he watches her go, wondering if she was actually looking at him because of his loud cheering. The girl keeps walking and leaves the room while Hatter and Cecilia just sit there at the long table, and feeling a bit embarrassed, Hatter asks Cecilia if he was making a scene by talking so loud just now. Hatter blushes and rubs his face, saying he's just a country kid who doesn't really know how loud he should be talking, while Cecilia watches him closely and wonders if he actually has a thing for girls like that blonde one who just walked by. Fast forward 5 days later, Hatter actually managed to land the internship he was talking about, so he shows up at the massive stone headquarters for Bamboo inside construction to get started. Standing in front of the group, Hatter introduces himself and mentions he's set to start at the Magic Academy in a month, explaining that his mom always told him to get as much experience as he can while he's still a student. He goes on to say that the company's goals really made sense to him when he saw the flyer at school, which is exactly why he decided to apply for the position. He bows as low as he can while thanking them for the chance, and the instructor at the front tells him it's a pleasure to meet him. Moving on, the instructor starts handing out a big stack of papers to everyone, so Hatter sits back down and starts looking through his copy. The guy at the front explains that they'll be heading out to the actual job site once everyone is done reading, so they need to make sure they memorize every detail on the pages. The chart shows that the first floor of the project is built with a mithril adamantite alloy to keep it extra sturdy, and for everything from the second floor up, they use an iron mithril mix that stays durable without being too heavy. Hatter looks over the construction plans and mutters to himself, wondering why they don't just use high-end orichalcum alloys for the whole building, since a voice from behind says that just asking that question shows he's been hitting the books lately. It's President Light who says he expected this kind of sharp thinking from Zelgius's student. While his assistant can't believe the big boss actually showed up, Light asks Hatter why he's here, pointing out that he's traveled a long way just to take on a simple internship. He walks over and explains that as the company president, it would be pretty rude of him not to come out and show his face to the new recruit. Getting back to business, Light tells him to flip to the next page of his papers to find the answer to his question. The document is a cost control sheet, and Light explains that any real-world job always comes with something called a budget. He goes on to say that in the professional world, the amount of money they're allowed to spend is already decided before they even start. Light points out that adamantite is an incredibly rare and expensive metal, so they have to use cheaper materials to stay within their price limit. But Hatter looks up with a totally straight face and asks if it isn't actually pretty easy to just make adamantite whenever they need it. President Light can't even process what he just heard, asking if Hatter really thinks he can just make the stuff. Hatter doesn't hesitate and says he'll just give it a shot. Hatter holds out his hand, and a massive flash of light fills the room, catching the president completely off guard. 2 solid metal cubes appear right in his palm, and while Hatter acts like it's no big deal, Light is losing his mind that something actually appeared. Hatter explains that since they need a ton of material for the construction site, this should bring their costs down to basically zero. He even mentions he whipped up a mithril orichalcum alloy while he was at it. Light tries to tell himself it's just a bluff, because there's no way anyone could create adamantine that easily. He grabs one of the cubes to prove it's fake, but the second he feels the weight, he realizes it's definitely the real deal. Cecilia picks up the other one and starts shaking, confirming to the president that the second cube is a high-grade mithril orichalcum alloy. Light is trembling now, asking if this is some kind of master illusion or where the hell it even came from. But Hatter just tells him it's not a trick. Hatter smiles and says he just made it out of thin air using atomic transmutation, which makes Light totally snap and tell him to do it again. The president gets this crazy look on his face, bringing up the fact that Hatter mentioned needing a whole lot more of those materials. Hatter nervously confirms that they could use his power right on the job site, and the president repeats the idea. Light starts losing it, clutching his head while realizing this tech is going to completely flip the construction industry upside down. The president suddenly gets polite and asks for the kid's name, so Hatter just tells him. Light tells Hatter they should just act like the internship never even happened, which leaves Hatter sounding pretty confused. Light drops a hand on his shoulder, admitting he's blown away that the kid actually has such a crazy special skill. The president explains he's not looking at him like a student anymore, but as a straight-up business owner, he gets serious and asks Hadar if they can work together on a project. But then Cecilia, who's been watching the whole thing from the side, just completely loses her mind at the offer. Light gets this intense look and tells Hadar he isn't letting go of his hand, and he definitely doesn't have the right to say no. The president starts dragging him toward the warehouse while Hadar complains about how unfair the guy is being. Light leads Hadar deep into a massive warehouse filled with stacks of wood and supplies. And as they walk, Hadar thinks about how huge the place is, realizing it's exactly what he'd expect from the top construction company in the Sergius Kingdom. Light stops and says he wants to get straight to the point. He asks Hadar exactly how much of that special alloy he's able to produce, and Hadar just says indeed. The kid takes a second to think before saying he can probably make enough for about 1,000 carriages. Light completely loses it, yelling that 1,000 is a crazy amount and that the production volume is basically impossible. Cecilia watches him freak out and tells him he's being way too dramatic about it. But Light just scratches his head and says he'll trust Hadar completely since the kid is the one saying it. Cecilia is still in shock, saying the whole thing makes absolutely no sense, which leads to her looking pretty worried, thinking that the president's way of being convinced is actually kind of a problem. She stares on in disbelief, whispering to herself that there's no way this is actually happening. Cecilia holds her head and yells that the president must be imagining some kind of giant, ridiculous carriage to make sense of those numbers, but Light just ignores her and says they should get right down to making the deal. Light gets right to business and asks Hadar for a massive order, 250 tons of one alloy and 750 tons of another, leaving the kid looking completely overwhelmed. Hadar can't believe the guy actually asked for such a crazy amount, but then Light drops the price 3.7 billion kukur. Hadar's head almost spins as he realizes that's the real astronomical number, and he starts panicking, asking if it's even okay to take that much money. It's enough to live like a king forever with plenty left. Light doesn't blink, telling him his skills are worth every bit of it. Hadar decides to just get to work then, saying he'll start transmuting right now while Light tells him he's counting on him. The kid reaches his hand out and gets focused. Ready to make it happen, glowing lights start flying everywhere as he uses his magic right in the middle of the warehouse. In a second, a massive pyramid of metal blocks appears, and the sight of it is so intense that Light just loses it, yelling about how unbelievable it looks in person and that it's a total sight to behold. Light suddenly yells for Hadar to wait a second and starts sprinting away. The kid's left standing there just confused as the guy tears through the building. Someone yells at Light to stop running in the halls, but he shouts back that he's in the middle of a massive deal. He even spills coffee on an employee, promising to buy them a whole new outfit later just to keep moving. Hadar can hear all the chaos from around the corner, and a moment later, Light comes sliding back in, totally out of breath and collapsing on the floor. Hadar asks if he's even okay, but Light just apologizes for the wait and starts opening up a heavy suitcase. He tells Hadar this is the payment for the metal from earlier, 3.7 billion kukuru in platinum coins, and seeing that much money piled up in one spot makes the kid realize just how rich he's about to be. Light actually apologizes for the amount, saying budget issues meant he could only bring this much for now. Hadar puts the coins in storage magic while Light explains that as a president, he has to do things the right way. Light smiles and says he'd really appreciate it if Hadar could give him some time to think of something else to offer in return. Hadar completely loses it, screaming and asking if he's actually going to get even more on top of the huge payment. Light mentions how being a president is actually pretty tough work, and Hadar asks if he can really handle that. Light explains that even though the money gets better as you move up, the mental stress gets way worse because he's carrying the lives of every employee and their family on his shoulders. Hearing that makes Hadar think of his own mom, wondering how she's doing back home. He tells Light that he's a truly great CEO, and Light just replies that he always tries his hardest to be. He puts a hand over his heart, explaining that human resources are human wealth, and that employees are the real assets of a company, which leaves Hadar looking totally impressed with the guy's attitude. Just then, they hear a noise from the entrance and turn to see who's at the door. Two students show up at the door looking pretty smug, clearly up to no good. Hadar just watches them with a serious look. Trying to figure out their deal, the guy asks if they're the new interns. But Light tells them they shouldn't be in here. The girl calls him president and says they waited for him to get somewhere alone, leaving the two of them joking about how having a real job is a total waste of time. She holds up a flyer and says they got a great idea after seeing the internship, before both of them charge in. Yelling that they're going to kidnap him for ransom, Hadar isn't having any of it. He starts up his atomic transmutation magic right, building a massive adamantite wall that the girl slams into while her partner gets knocked back, leaving him yelling at her to wake up while she's down for the count. The guy trying to kidnap Light is sweating bullets, realizing that he literally just hit a massive brick wall as the huge adamantite wall starts crumbling into dust. Light stands there watching, talking about how he truly respects President Light from the bottom of his heart for being so compassionate, claiming that even the strongest metal in the world can't compare to the bond he has with his team. He turns to the kid and Hadar just looks at the two criminals, asking if they even have a bond like that before his expression goes totally dark. He asks them if they're actually prepared to make enemies out of every single person, which sends the guy into a total panic. He lets out a loud scream, completely losing his mind from the pressure, and just like that the warehouse goes quiet. Both of the kidnappers are dropped on the floor, leaving the guy passed out cold just from being that scared. He's shaking and totally out of it, so Hadar finally lets out a long sigh, dropping the scary act and relaxing for a second before asking Light if he's hurt. Light says he's fine, but he still looks a little shaken by how intense things just got. Light is completely stunned, barely able to process what he just saw as he gasps, realizing the kid isn't just using some weird alchemy, but has combat skills that are totally off the charts. He just stares at Hadar, while the kid smiles and says he's just glad things didn't turn into a total mess, but Light can't help but tell him that he's honestly an incredible talent. Just then, the security guards come running toward the building after hearing the massive explosion, yelling to check if everyone is okay. Light tells them they had a bit of a situation, but Hadar handled the whole thing perfectly. A whole month passes by in a flash, and soon enough, the new students are being congratulated on their enrollment right after the big entrance ceremony at the Zelgius Royal Magic Academy wraps up. Hadar walks into Class A and spots a familiar face, realizing that he and Cecilia are actually in the same class, and she just gives him a friendly wave, saying it's really nice to meet him. Hadar just gives a big, bright smile and agrees with her, but then Cecilia gets curious and asks him how his internship actually went, wondering if everything turned out okay. Hadar starts acting a bit awkward and sweats a little as he tries to find the right words to explain. While Cecilia looks on, he drops the news that he actually got an unofficial job offer already, which leaves her totally shocked. She takes a second to process it, but then realizes that since it's Hadar, getting an offer this early is basically a given. Cecilia tells him she's positive about his skills, but Hadar just laughs it off, telling her it was probably just a bit of beginner's luck. She decides she'll just accept that he's a top-level honors student for now, though she can't help but yell at him for being so casual about such a huge deal while he just smiles back. Hadar knows he can't let it go to his head, thinking about how he needs to keep his feet on the ground and keep doing his best, especially since he spent his whole life in the mountains and is still getting used to being around so many people. Hadar just wants to have a normal school life and hopes he can actually get along with everyone, but someone tall walks up to his desk and asks if he's the famous scholarship student everyone is talking about. Hadar gets a little nervous and says that's him, but before he can even finish, the person slams their hand down on his desk so hard it makes him jump out of his skin. The student turns out to be a girl with a super intense look on her face, and she tells Hadar to wait because she's got a job for him. Hadar starts to lose it, panicking and wondering if he already messed up and did something wrong, while Cecilia tries to stay calm and asks what the girl actually wants from them. The tall girl says she's getting to the point, suddenly reaching out with her hand faster than Hadar can even react. He flinches and tries to cover his face, thinking he's about to get clocked, but she just grabs his hands in a really tight grip that catches him totally off guard. She looks at him with stars in her eyes and begs him to make something special for her, specifically a pair of adamantite dumbbells. Hadar is totally confused and asks if she really just said dumbbells, and the girl just gives him a huge smile and says yeah, explaining that her main hobby is working out while holding up the weights she has on her. Hadar can't believe she carries those things around all day, but she just keeps lifting, complaining that her usual training isn't doing much lately because every dumbbell feels too light. And as she gets into her workout, Hadar has to tell her to stop swinging him around since she's still got a grip on him. She puts the weights down and says she saw something amazing with her own eyes. The girl starts talking about the legendary exam where Hadar forged a sword from orichalcum and adamantite and even beat the examiner, which just leaves Hadar even more confused as he asks what legend she's even talking about. Cecilia gets really hyped up too, asking the girl if she actually saw that legendary exam up close, which totally catches Hadar off guard, leaving Cecilia feeling jealous and asking if she can hear the whole story later on, and the tall girl tells her to leave it to her, while Hadar tries to tell them both to stop getting all excited on their own. The tall girl tells Hadar she definitely doesn't expect him to make those dumbbells for free, and promises to reward him handsomely for the trouble, while it looks like they're totally in on a scheme. Cecilia jumps in saying he should definitely make them, making Hadar freak out and ask why she's taking her side. But Hadar eventually gives in and says he'll do it, feeling relieved that her request was actually something simple. So he gets to work right there, using his crafting magic to create a bright flash of light, and once the light fades, a whole row of heavy dumbbells is sitting there as he asks if these will work. The girl starts lifting them immediately and says the weight is fantastic, making Hadar smile and say he's glad she likes them. Then Hadar remembers something else he has and reaches into a magic portal, muttering that it should be around here somewhere, which leaves Cecilia stunned that he uses storage magic like it's no big deal. He finally finds it and sets a strange-looking case on the table, leaving both girls completely speechless. Cecilia asks what that weird thing is, so Hadar just tells her to watch and presses a button. Suddenly, the girl and her weights start floating, making Cecilia lose it because they're literally defying gravity. Cecilia gets super excited and asks if that's the legendary item from the magic exam, but Hadar just laughs it off, saying it's a gravity device and wondering why everyone calls his stuff legendary. He even offers to let her keep it, mentioning the weight adjustment feature should come in handy. The girl tells him he can't just give away legendary items like freebies, right as the door swings open. The teacher walks in and finds all three of them just hovering near the ceiling with their gear, which completely freaks the students out as they realize class is actually starting while they're stuck in midair. Their teacher, Seal, says she gets that kids get excited for a new life, but floating is a first for her. She tells them to just start the self-introductions, while the three of them can only hang there and apologize. After the whole floating incident, things finally settle down under Seal's lead as the rest of Class A gets through their self-introductions, with everyone taking turns, and eventually, Seal calls for the next person to step forward. A student stands up with a clatter, while the room starts buzzing with whispers as a girl with long blonde hair walks up to the front. One of the girls in the crowd looks completely blindsided when she sees who it is, and another student leans over to whisper about how insanely cute the new girl is, while the girl at the front gives a bright smile and tells everyone her name is Jasmine Veilvely. She says she's here to learn as much as possible so she can help her father, the president of Bamboo Inside Construction, which immediately makes Hadar's heart drop as he realizes she's the same girl from the cafeteria. It all clicks for him that she's actually President Light's daughter, which explains why she was staring at him earlier. Ian looks over at Hadar and casually suggests that he should go for Jasmine if he's interested, since he's going to pass on her himself to keep it from messing with his work. Hadar is just confused about what work a student would have, but Seal cuts the conversation short by telling Ian it's his turn to head up. He realizes he was talking too much and walks to the front of the room with a big smile. He tells everyone his name is Ian Sergius and says it's great to meet them. Then he actually starts lifting weights right there at the podium, telling the class that his main hobby is working out. He tops off the intro by casually mentioning he's the first prince of the country, which sends Hadar into a total panic. Seal moves things along and calls for the scholarship student to come up next. Hadar stands up and heads to the front of the classroom. He keeps it simple, telling everyone his name is Hadar and that he grew up in a tiny village far out in the mountains. He finishes his introduction by telling the rest of the class that his favorite hobby is just reading. As he stands there, he starts sweating because he feels like a total bore compared to the CEO's daughter and a literal prince. While the other students are hanging out by the lockers, Hadar sits alone at his desk, getting lost in a book. The text says mana works like waves and particles, which just leaves Hadar looking totally lost and confused about it all. Just then, someone yells out to the bookworm, making Hadar look up from his desk to see who's there. Ian Sergius shows up already sweating with a dumbbell and tells him they should work out. Hadar just thinks the guy is way too intense. As Ian starts doing reps, he asks what's so interesting in that book. Hadar tells him it's just stuff about mana and waves, so Ian repeats it back. Hadar explains his theory that if mana is like a wave, you could use magic with the opposite phase to cancel out an enemy's spell, but Ian just stares at him and admits he has no idea what any of those words mean. Ian leans back and tells Hadar that if someone is actually smart, they should be able to explain things so anyone can understand them. Hadar gets a bit annoyed because even though Ian is a total meathead, he's actually making a valid point, so he holds up a finger and suggests they try thinking of mana as gears instead. Ian just looks at him and asks what gears have to do with it. Hadar starts his explanation, telling Ian to imagine two gears that are exactly the same, pointing out that if you jam them together, they stop moving, and then asks if that makes sense when applied to mana. Ian finally gets it, or at least he thinks he does, asking if it's like a split routine for working out different muscles. Hadar just tells him it's not like that at all. Ian decides that since they use their brains, it's time to go move their bodies, dragging Hadar along even though the kid thinks the gym logic is a total stretch. Ian reminds him they have that big class tomorrow. So the next day, Everyone meets up at the Zelgius Academy training grounds, standing in a big group on the field. Seal shows up and tells the class her subject is magical combat exercises, which is a pretty simple class where they'll just form pairs and do mock battles every single period. She explains that for today, they need to measure everyone's combat ability so she can figure out who to pair up. So Hadar and the others listen in as she tells them they're going to start by testing their defensive skills first. Seal continues her announcement, explaining that for the students who took the creative exam, she's going to measure their offensive skills too since she wants to start with the scholarship student, knowing the whole class is probably dying to see what he can do. Hadar nervously steps forward as the rest of the students start getting hyped up, with one guy shouting about how this is his first time seeing a real fight up close. The pressure starts mounting as a girl nearby wonders what his fighting style is even like, leaving Hadar feeling totally awkward under all the attention. Even Jasmine is watching closely, and the other students whisper about how they can't afford to look bad while the daughter of a big-shot president is right there. Ian turns to Cecilia with a huge grin, reminding her that Hadar actually has enough raw magic power to pull off something crazy like creating adamantium. So Cecilia gets just as fired up, telling Ian she's ready to see whatever insane nonsense the kid is going to pull off during this test. Hadar looks back at his friends and thinks they're having way too much fun with this, which is when Seal finally loses her patience and tells them to shut up. She turns her focus back to Hadar to start the measurement, and the kid braces himself as the test officially begins, and then Seal tells him to just focus on blocking her magic for now, warning him that the attacks are going to get stronger every single time he successfully stops one. Seal starts the test by throwing a small ice ball, which Hadar blocks easily, but she immediately ramps up her power for a much bigger shot. Hadar nods along and says he gets the idea, but then he tells her that if she's going to increase the intensity slowly, he's down to give it a try, though he's secretly wondering if his anti-phase magic is actually going to work. Seal just smiles and says that going through all those small steps with a guy like him would be a huge hassle, which definitely catches Hadar off guard. She yells out that they should just kick things off with a massive move instead, leaving the kid totally shaking as he asks why she's jumping straight to the end. Realizing she isn't backing down, Hadar grits his teeth and tells himself he has no other choice but to do this, so he focuses everything on her mana phase, starting a deep analysis of the energy she's putting out to find a weakness. His eyes lock onto the flow of her magic. He finally sees the pattern he needs to counter the attack, and he reaches his hand out wide, shouting for his anti-phase magic to activate right as the energy hits. Seal looks totally confident, telling Hadar she wants to see if he can actually handle a hit like this, and then everyone watches from the sidelines as the two of them face off. Seal is totally losing it, stumbling back and wondering if her magic actually just misfired. She's shaking like crazy, looking completely embarrassed that her big move just fizzled out into nothing, leaving Hadar standing there, jokingly telling her not to get all nervous just because she's facing a monster student like him. He's sweating a bit himself though, thinking she's the real monster here, but then he lets out a long breath and cracks a smile. Even though it's chaotic, he's just glad because this whole mess actually proves the hypothesis he's been working on. Back on the sidelines, the muscular girl finishes a rep and notes that Hadar looks pretty satisfied with himself. Cecilia's just standing there worried, figuring the kid probably pulled off another stunt they didn't see. Jasmine just smiles through the confusion, saying she's sure it's just something so high-level that none of them could even wrap their heads around it. The muscular girl thanks Jasmine for having her back, but Cecilia's not having it. She tells her to stop dragging poor Jasmine into her weird way of thinking. Meanwhile, Seal gets her head back in the game and yells out an apology for that weak showing. She says she's going for real this time, and a massive wave of energy starts blowing back everything in the area. The power she's putting out is insane. Hadar can feel the pressure and starts panicking, asking if she's actually gotten way stronger than she was just a second ago. Seal holds out her hand and dares him to try and stop her this time. Hadar just lets out a scream as the magic hits a whole new level, and the entire class just stands there in the middle of the field, watching the two of them face off while the wind kicks up a massive cloud of dust all around them. Seal is totally losing it, yelling at her own magic and asking why it isn't working before trying one more time but nothing happens. She keeps shouting, getting more and more annoyed as she demands that her magic just come out already, but the air stays still. Eventually she just breaks down and starts begging, asking for her great magic to please show up for her, but she's just met with complete silence. Seal slumps down while the class and Hadar just watch. Hadar nervously tries to speak up, but Seal cuts him off to apologize to everyone, saying she's sorry for things ending like this right after becoming their homeroom teacher. With tears in her eyes and a sad smile, she says she's resigning today, which has Hadar completely losing it in shock. The rest of the girls are just as horrified. Jasmine is speechless while Cecilia yells at Hadar, accusing him of being the one who made her cry. Hadar starts panicking and begs the professor not to say she's quitting, but Seal just looks away and tells him not to try and stop her. She sadly asks what they could even learn from a teacher who can't even use magic, but Hadar quickly jumps in to tell her she's got the wrong idea. He finally admits he was actually the one interfering with her magic activation the whole time, leaving Seal sitting there on the ground completely stunned. Seal is absolutely losing it, yelling at Hadar and asking why he's being so mean to her, while she demands to know when she ever told him he could mess with her spells, and how he even has the power to do it. Hadar looks down all embarrassed and admits he just wanted to try out something he read in a book. Seal just rubs her head like she has a massive migraine, telling him that messing with magic circles is way too high level and explaining that real interference magic takes a ton of time to activate, so he shouldn't be able to just pop it off like that. Hadar agrees with her, but then drops the news that he didn't actually use interference magic at all, which leaves Seal completely confused as he explains it wasn't anything fancy. He just treated Mana like a wave and hit her magic with a phase that was the exact opposite, making the whole spell just cancel itself out, and Hadar laughs it off like it's nothing, saying real interference is way more useful anyway, but Seal just screams that it's a huge deal. Eventually, she just hits her limit and says she's too tired to even care anymore, walking away while Hadar panics. Seal decides to just call it and marks Hadar's official measurement as bottomless since his power is breaking everything, and she tells him not to sweat it because he's still top of the class, but Hadar just thinks the whole scoring system is a total mess. Ian and Cecilia chime in, saying Hadar is just on another level and he should probably be used to being the best by now. Suddenly, Seal snaps at them, asking if they're having a good time while she's over here losing her mind, which sends the whole group into a bit of a panic as Jasmine walks up and tells Hadar he should just be happy with his first place spot. She gives him a big smile and says it's amazing, mentioning that being an honor student clearly isn't just for show. Hadar gets all shy and tells her it's not like that. He feels like he still has a ton of work to do before he's actually good. Jasmine gets a little annoyed and asks why he's only formal when he talks to her, but Hadar just stammers through some excuse. Cecilia watches the two of them from the side, silently wondering what's actually going on with Hadar's weird behavior. Then Jasmine just tells him to drop the formal act already, so Hadar finally gives in and says he'll try to act normal. Cecilia watches Hadar and Jasmine from a distance, thinking that even though they're just talking, she feels really uneasy for some reason. Seal starts to call out for the next student to come up for their power test, but she suddenly stops and looks up at the sky. A giant white feather drifts down and lands right in her hand. She just stares at it, wondering where it could have come from. The second she realizes what it is, Seal's face goes totally pale and she looks like she's seen a ghost. She starts shaking and telling herself this has to be impossible, so Hadar walks over and asks if she's doing all right. Seal ignores him and looks back up at the sky with a look of total shock while Hadar just stands there confused. Out of nowhere, a massive griffin drops out of the sky. It's a crazy chimera monster with an eagle's body and lion legs. Seal explains that this thing is a high-level monster that even top-tier adventurers can't handle, and it shouldn't be down this low. The beast opens its beak and lets out a deafening screech that echoes across the entire training ground, making the school staff trigger a full emergency lockdown as the students scramble to figure out what's going on. The school staff announces that the mock battle is officially on hold. Because of the emergency, everyone is told to be careful as Hadar, and the girls try to figure out what to do next. The narration warns that getting caught in those massive monster claws is basically a death sentence, explaining that once the beast has you, there's no escape and you'll just end up as its prey. As the griffin circles the academy walls, the same warning about being caught hangs in the air, reminding everyone that the high-level beast is looking for its next meal right above them. Muscular Girl and Cecilia are both losing it. They're completely shocked and can't believe this is happening. Jasmine is right there with them, shaking and looking totally terrified as the beast gets closer. Hadar just walks forward and casually says that if getting grabbed is the big problem, then he just needs to wreck the monster before it can even touch him. Muscular Girl can't believe his logic. The griffin suddenly drops out of the sky like a rock, catching everyone off guard as it slams into the ground. Seal sees it coming and yells for everyone to move. She tells them to dodge with everything they've got before the monster hits the dirt with a massive crash. Someone lets out a scream as dust flies everywhere, and the beast immediately takes back off into the air. Seal calls out to see if the group is okay, but Cecilia notices something wrong and points toward the sky, telling the professor that Jasmine is gone. Hadar looks up with a serious expression, watching the monster fly away. It's already high above the trees, and it's definitely not empty-handed because Jasmine is stuck right in its massive talons. She's terrified and crying as people on the ground shout her name, but there's a specific reason why these griffins are ranked as A-rank monsters. It isn't just because they are tough or great at fighting. It's actually because they're way smarter than they look. The narrator explains that the beast was being tactical. It didn't just attack randomly, it waited for the perfect moment to snatch up the weakest person in the whole group. The whole group is totally falling apart. The monster's plan to freak everyone out worked perfectly, leaving Hadar standing there looking focused. The narrator points out that taking down one griffin isn't the real problem here. But the muscular girl is terrified that if they try anything, Jasmine might get hurt in the crossfire, so they have to end this instantly. Hadar watches the beast fly off and thinks about using flight magic, but he knows he has to save his mana for later. The muscular girl is confused when Hadar mentions getting close, wondering how that's even possible while Hadar asks Ian if he still has that gravity device with him. Ian says he does, looking pretty nervous about whatever Hadar is planning. He tells Hadar it's ready to go, and the kid just tells him to hand it over for a second because he's got a wild idea. He grabs the device and starts messing with the settings, turning the gravity reduction up to the max. Then he drops the bombshell. He tells the muscular girl to throw him at the griffin to save his magic, and she just loses it. She screams at him that there's absolutely no way she's doing something that insane. Hadar tells the muscular girl they're fresh out of time, and she's the only one strong enough to help. So he looks her right in the eye and asks her to lend him her power. He tells her it's the only way to save Jasmine, which leaves the girl standing there totally speechless. But Hadar just reaches down and clicks the gravity device into gear, and Cecilia and Ian can only watch from the sidelines, looking completely blown away. The muscular girl lets out a huge yell as she winds up for the most insane throw of her life. Then she launches Hadar straight into the sky toward the griffin, screaming for him to go. Ian is left wondering what the kid is even planning while Cecilia just stares up at him in shock. Hadar steadies himself in midair, realizing he's finally far enough away to attack without hitting Jasmine, so he puts his hand out and gets his magic ready, telling his spell to pierce through. Hadar lets out a huge dragon flash attack. It connects clean, blasting the griffin's wing and sending feathers everywhere. Jasmine is completely lost, yelling out to ask what the hell is happening, and then the bird finally lets her go. She starts falling through the air, totally frozen and unable to even think as she screams while plummeting toward the ground. But just before she hits the dirt, someone reaches out and catches her midair like it's nothing, stopping her fall instantly. It's Hadar. He asks if she's doing okay while holding her. She can't believe it's actually him. Jasmine asks how he even got up there, and he just casually says he had Ian throw him, making her wonder if he's even human. He tells her he's gonna use flight magic to land them safely, but looking back up, that giant bird is still in the sky. It looks pretty messed up, but it's still flying. Hadar realizes he held back a bit too much, and Jasmine just stands there looking totally drained. Jasmine is sweating and can barely believe it, asking if that previous attack was him actually holding back. Hadar just stays calm and tells her he's going to finish this right now, charging up a ton of energy, and then he calls out his rapid-fire dragon flash, sending a massive wall of light beams straight up right into the sky, where the giant bird is still trying to stay airborne. He keeps his eyes locked on the target, looking totally focused while the power flows out of him. The beams connect over and over, absolutely wrecking the monster as it gets blasted out of the air. Jasmine just watches the whole thing happen with her mouth open, completely stunned by what she's seeing. As the bird crashes down in the distance, Hadar lets out a sigh and says he's just glad he made it in time, telling her that if anything happened to her, he wouldn't be able to face her father, making her blush like crazy. The fight is finally over, with the giant creature lying defeated and broken on the ground. Hadar and Jasmine finally reunite in a huge hug, while everyone else just watches. Seal rushes over to check on them, and they both promise her they're doing just fine. Suddenly Seal grabs Hadar in a tight squeeze, making the poor kid completely lose it. She starts listing off all the crazy stuff he just did, like flying and one-shotting that monster. Hadar can already tell he's in for a massive interrogation once they get back, but Seal decides to drop it for a second, looking way more relieved than anything else. She tells them she's just glad they're safe, and Cecilia stands there agreeing with her. Jasmine looks pretty down, apologizing to everyone for not being able to do more, so Prince Ian steps up and promises her that next time, he'll be the one protecting her. Then Ian shifts the vibe, saying he needs to talk about Hadar, which catches Cecilia off guard. Seal tells Hadar she's just going to give him the credits for her class unconditionally. Not just that, she's clearing him for all the required combat courses right now. Hadar is completely stunned, but she just says she'll handle the headmaster himself, leaving the kid wondering what she even means by that. Ian tells him to stop asking stupid questions, because after seeing what he can do, Seal admits she doesn't actually have anything left to teach him. She figures the other teachers will do the same thing, since the whole situation is pretty absurd. Then she gets a serious look and asks Hadar if he would actually train her instead. He can tell nobody is letting up on this. Seal explains that while the griffin attack was a total fluke, they can't really say it won't ever happen again, and she wants to be ready for the next time things go south. Hadar is still confused about why she's asking him specifically, but then the athletic girl and Cecilia both chime in, saying they want him to train them as well. They both look pretty excited about it, so Hadar starts yelling at them to stop making fun of him. He's convinced they're all just messing with him at this point, but Seal ends the conversation there. She tells everyone she'll handle the Griffin mess, and that they should all go rest up before their next class. As the students start heading back from the training grounds, Hadar realizes he might have just accidentally agreed to be everyone's personal trainer. And just as he's processing all that, Jasmine calls out his name to get his attention. He turns around looking pretty wiped out from the day's drama when she stops him to say thanks again for saving her life earlier. She even calls him her lifesaver. Hadar starts panicking and waving his hands around because he thinks she's making way too big of a deal out of it. He tells her that calling him a lifesaver is definitely pushing it, but Jasmine gets all quiet and looks down at her hands. She tells him she honestly has no idea how to properly pay him back for what he did, so Hadar just gives her a big, friendly smile. He says he'd be totally happy if they could just stay good friends from now on, which completely catches her off guard. She turns bright red and starts yelling at him, calling him an idiot for saying something so embarrassing right out in the open. Hadar is losing it because he doesn't see what's so weird about wanting to be friends. He's standing there looking totally confused while Jasmine is stuck in her own head, wondering if he actually meant he wants to stay by her side forever. She's completely overthinking things, and finally, she just crosses her arms and looks away. She blushes hard and mutters under her breath that wanting to be friends was actually her line. Jasmine tells Hadar to let her know if he ever needs anything at all, and she adds that if it's a problem money can solve, she'll help him out unconditionally. Hadar is sweating because he thinks she's suddenly giving off major CEO's daughter vibes, but she just grabs him and says class is starting. He tells her to stop pulling his arm as they head inside where the teacher says he heard the whole story from Professor Seal. He tells the room it's a miracle no one got hurt after being attacked by a griffin. The teacher just decides they should have a normal class anyway, which makes Hadar laugh a bit since this guy really just goes at his own pace. The teacher explains they're turning sand into crystals today using the circles in their textbooks, so Hadar finishes instantly. Jasmine and Cecilia lose it because they can't believe he's already done. Jasmine is totally wiped out by Hadar's crazy skill, but Cecilia just smiles and says he's being his usual self. Hadar doesn't get why they're so shocked, so he tells them he's the one who should be impressed, making Jasmine look over at Ian, who's randomly lifting weights in the middle of the room. She's completely confused and asks why he's even doing muscle training right now since Ian just casually says he's bad at drawing. Cecilia snaps back that he shouldn't be lumping magic circles in with art class, especially when Hadar is standing right there as this once-in-a-lifetime scholarship student with insane talent. While on the other side of things, the first prince of the country is just obsessed with getting a workout in. Jasmine looks at Cecilia and tells her she's clearly been through a lot of stress too. She really feels for her friend, which makes Cecilia lose it and start crying out Jasmine's name because she's so happy she finally found friends who actually understand her. Jasmine tells her they should just help each other out from now on, even though the whole girls' night vibe feels totally wrong with Ian in the background just cranking out reps. Someone yells at them to take the class seriously, but eventually the school day ends. Later that night, everyone gets together to clink their glasses for a huge toast. The students are all hanging out and relaxing at a fancy party in the main hall. Hadar stands there totally speechless while the muscular girl next to him gets hyped up, because the spread of food in front of them is insane. They're both looking at the buffet, and the girl yells about how delicious it all looks, but the weirdest part is the giant griffin head sitting right behind the table. It's huge and staring right at them while Hadar stammers in disbelief. He realizes that they actually kept the heads on some of these creatures for the display, and it's making it really hard for him to eat. He feels like he's being glared at by his dinner, but that's not stopping the muscular girl at all. She starts loading up her plate and calls the whole thing a protein paradise, which catches the attention of Seal. She stands there with her drink, shocked that the school would actually serve something as expensive as griffin meat for a simple class party. Hadar asks her if she actually likes the stuff. She says it's a high-class ingredient that people rarely get to eat, but she's having a total crisis of confidence. She starts questioning if she even has the right to eat fancy food when she feels like she hasn't done anything to help her students yet, though the muscular girl doesn't care and tells her she has to try some. Seal gives in pretty fast, saying she can't really refuse a free meal, leaving Hadar just staring at her. Hadar catches up with Ian and thanks him for everything that went down earlier today, and Ian gives a thumbs up before asking how things are going with her. Hadar acts like he has no clue who Ian's talking about, but Ian isn't buying it, he's clearly talking about Jasmine. Ian leans in close and teases Hadar for risking his neck to save her, claiming he's secretly into her. Hadar starts sweating and tries to tell him it's really nothing like that, But right then, Jasmine shows up with a drink in her hand and asks what they're saying about her. Hadar jumps and shouts her name in total panic. Jasmine gets all flustered and demands to know what the conversation was about, while Ian just laughs at the whole situation. Ian tries to play it off by stuffing his face with food and saying it was nothing. Jasmine isn't convinced and gives them a look, wondering what they're hiding, but then Ian gets a bit more serious. He tells the group that he's been constantly surprised ever since the day he first met Hadar, and points out how Hadar seems to pull off literal miracles as naturally as most people breathe. Hadar stays quiet for a second, then smiles and tells Ian that he could say the exact same thing about him. The girls just look on, a bit confused by the bromance, while Hadar starts opening up about his past. He explains that before coming to the academy, he spent his whole life just living in the mountains with his mom. Hadar talks about how it was a little rough leaving his mom behind, but since he got to the academy, he's made such great friends that he's having the time of his life, and he honestly feels like coming here was the best decision. It's a bigger miracle to him than any magic. He gives them one more huge thanks just for being there for him, but Jasmine and Ian just stand there shaking, totally overwhelmed by how blunt and sincere he's being. Ian finally loses it and asks how Hadar can say such cheesy stuff without even flinching, while Jasmine hides behind her drink, blushing hard and muttering about how Hadar is just being himself. Hadar starts to panic, wondering if he accidentally said something super weird and embarrassing, but Ian just brushes it off and turns his attention toward Jasmine. He asks if Hadar's speech is really the only reason her face is so red, and she just gets even more defensive. One of the girls leans in to whisper something to Jasmine, making her face turn bright red as she completely loses her cool. She snaps at Ian, calling him an idiot and asking what he's even talking about, which leaves Hadar completely panicked as he watches her shatter her glass in a fit of rage. He yells her name, asking what could have possibly set her off like that. Jasmine doesn't stop there, lecturing Ian about being the first prince of the country and having zero tact despite being a total muscle brain. But Ian just laughs it off, telling her that falling in love really adds some spice to life, especially for people like them who don't have anyone special yet. Jasmine tells him to mind his own business while Hadar desperately tries to get them to stop fighting before things get even worse. It backfires though, as Jasmine turns around and screams at Hadar, asking him whose fault he thinks this is in the first place. Hadar starts tearing up from the pressure, crying out for Cecilia to come save him because Jasmine is being way too scary. But then he stops for a second and looks around the crowded party hall, realizing that something is definitely off. He notices that Cecilia hasn't been around for a while, and he starts to wonder exactly where she disappeared to. Cecilia is totally losing it, gripping her hair and groaning in frustration as she screams out, leaving Hadar in a one-on-one meeting with Seal after school. She asks him if he's worried about the future, and Seal wonders if he's being sarcastic, thinking he's not being cool. But Hadar insists he just wants real advice since he honestly has no idea what he wants to do with his life yet. Hadar mentions that seeing Ian and Jasmine with their futures all figured out is making him feel pretty anxious, so Seal tells him those two are just exceptions to the rule. She says he could become anything he wants, but she stops to think for a second, trying to find the best way to answer his problem before suggesting he should just try a bit of everything for now. She moves on to explain the school's internship program, including the administrative course for managing things like potion orders, while also mentioning the practical course where students treat actual patients, leaving them to choose which one they want to try. Hadar hears that the practical course is actually pretty exclusive, only open to students who already know how to use healing magic, so he figures he might as well go for it since he's already got those skills down. He heads over and is surprised to see some familiar faces waiting there, including Cecilia and a nun. Hadar calls out to her, and Cecilia nearly jumps out of her skin, totally shocked to see him showing up. She asks what he's even doing there, so Hadar explains that his teacher pointed him toward this path after their talk about his future. Hadar is actually really happy about it, telling her he's relieved to have a friend along, while Cecilia just stands there feeling completely stressed out. She's secretly panicking that if she has to work right next to someone as crazy strong as Hadar, she'll never get a chance to stand out. Hadar starts to wonder if he's even wanted there, but it's time to get moving as they head over to the practical course area. They reach the church treatment booth, a big hall full of people. The instructor tells them there's no sense in waiting around, it's time for the students to start treating actual patients. The instructor makes it clear that they're starting small, only expecting the students to take care of the mild cases, explaining that they'll see everything from stomach issues to small cuts, but as long as they keep their cool, it'll be fine. One of the nuns lets them know the pro staff is right there if things get messy, so Hadar and Cecilia both agree to the plan. As they get ready to start, Cecilia leans over and whispers Hadar's name, so he looks over to see what she wants. She's suddenly looking super intense, telling him they need to give this absolutely everything they've got. Hadar is surprised by her energy, but Cecilia is already focused on the prize, saying they should aim for some job offers. Today the two of them split up into their own little booths to start seeing their first round of patients. Right away, Cecilia's patient starts acting up, asking if he's really lucky enough to be treated by such a beautiful girl. The guy keeps the charm on heavy, telling her that just looking at her makes him feel healthy again, which has her blushing hard. Cecilia gets totally flustered and calls him a smooth talker, but she tries to shake it off and get her head back in the game. Things go south immediately when Cecilia's beauty literally knocks her patient out cold, causing the nun to snap at her. Cecilia starts losing it, waving her arms and begging the old man to wake up and stay with her. She tries to pull herself together, telling the guy she'll find the perfect magic for him if he just tells her where it hurts. But the patient tells her to just focus on his bruises, making Cecilia cry and beg him to watch his phrasing. Hadar watches from the next booth over. He feels for her, thinking she shouldn't let the weird comments get to her. He starts focusing on his own work, figuring he needs to be super precise so he doesn't miss any of his patient's injuries. Suddenly, a light bulb goes off in his head, and he realizes he has a way better way to handle this. Before long, Hadar announces he's already finished, earning a quick thanks from the person he was treating. The guy is stunned and says his knee is completely fine now. So Hadar asks if there's anything else wrong, which leads to the patient realizing his eyesight has magically improved too, leaving Cecilia standing there totally confused by Hadar's power. Patients start shouting from the booths about how their sprains and allergies have vanished, plus their skin is suddenly perfect. Cecilia is watching all this and starts losing it over how many miracles are happening. She rips the curtain open and yells for Hadar, demanding to know what he thinks he's doing. Hadar is just sitting there with a new patient, casually casting perfect heal like it's nothing, while Cecilia panics about him using advanced magic. She yells that nobody uses that kind of spell for minor injuries, but Hadar just says there aren't any rules against it. Cecilia can't believe he's just spamming it everywhere. Hadar explains it works for everything and nobody has complained yet, but the entire staff is standing there completely speechless because of the overkill. Cecilia points out that he shouldn't be popping off high-level spells so casually. The nun is shaking, wondering what's wrong with this kid. Hadar looks at them totally confused and asks if this isn't just way more efficient for everyone, especially since he even asks them how they feel after the spell is done, making Cecilia scream that he has the whole process backward. Cecilia looks at him pretty worried and says she gets why he's doing it, but she asks if he's even tired after spamming magic that much. Hadar just puts a hand to his chin and tells her he's actually doing just fine, because his mana recovers just as fast as he spends it. He holds up a finger and mentions his mana pool is basically full. So Cecilia just stares at his happy face and tells him she has no idea what he's even talking about anymore. She decides to just blame everything on him being weird for now, but tells him he needs to learn how normal people actually think. Hadar stands up fast, making the two of them start screaming at each other. Hadar claims he's just a normal commoner, but Cecilia tells him he's totally full of it, as she keeps yelling about how normal people can't just go around spamming top-tier healing spells like that. Hadar waves his arms around and shouts back that there has to be somebody else out there who can do it too. The two of them stop dead when a voice from above tells them both that's enough. The nun stands there with a scary smile, telling them it's nice they're buddies now, but they still have a job to finish. The nun claps her hands together with a big smile, making the two of them jump. Cecilia immediately starts panicking and apologizes for the shouting. They decide to get back to it, and Cecilia tells Hadar they should both do their best with the rest of the work they have left. Hadar is totally pumped and yells that he's going to get through everything using his perfect heal, which just makes Cecilia look even more tired. But then Cecilia stops moving as a sharp pain hits her head. She winces and lets out a quiet groan while holding her forehead. She ends up collapsing right there on the floor, and Hadar freaks out, shouting her name as he sees her go down. He rushes to her side to ask if she's okay, but Cecilia just tries to play it off. She tells him it's just a little headache. She tells him not to worry because it happens all the time, but Hadar isn't buying it. He asks what she even means by it being normal. Right as they're talking, another massive spike of pain hits her even harder than before, and her eyes go wide as she starts screaming at the top of her lungs while clutching her head. Hadar can only watch in horror as he shouts her name again. The scream echoes through the hall, bringing a nun running over to ask what's going on. Hadar doesn't hesitate and starts calling for the staff to come help. The moment Hadar tries to restart his treatment, Cecilia grabs her head and drops down. In the next second she's losing it, screaming while the crowd watches in shock. The nuns rush toward the center where Cecilia is on the floor, and one tells Hadar she's got it from here, asking him to let them handle the situation. She says the scream isn't normal at all, then yells for everyone nearby to cast their strongest healing magic on Cecilia right away. One healer casts a high heal while another tries to stabilize her, and the whole group forms a circle to let their magic pour into her at once. Cecilia is shown in total pain, screaming her lungs out while clutching her head as all the different spells hit her. The nun looks completely drained and wonders if this is actually beyond their power to fix, while Hadar realizes their magic isn't doing anything. The crowd watches as the room starts to feel different, and Hadar stands up right in front of Cecilia, looking determined as he starts to glow with power. Hadar admits he knows it's not really his place to jump in when there are professionals around, but he reaches his hand out anyway. His hand shines with an intense light, and he shouts that he just can't stand by and watch her suffer like this anymore. He calls out his perfect heal, and a huge burst of energy hits Cecilia, completely covering her in a bright light. The bright light from Hadar's magic finally starts to fade away, leaving the nuns and priests standing there, totally stunned by what they just saw. Cecilia is on her knees, gasping for air and dripping with sweat, looking like she's just been through a war. Hadar asks if she's doing all right, and she tries to smile, thanking him before the pain suddenly rips through her again. She lets out a gut-wrenching scream and collapses right back into Hadar's arms. He realizes his magic didn't actually cure her, it was just a temporary fix, and the nun can't believe it either. She's never heard of a headache that a perfect heal couldn't handle, but then a thought hits Hadar like a ton of bricks. He asks if she's dealing with cluster headaches, knowing that the pain from those is so brutal people call them suicide headaches. It's a localized agony that shows up and disappears whenever it wants, totally ignoring how healthy a person is, making it one of the rare things that even the most powerful healing magic in the world can't ever fix. Hadar looks down at Cecilia as she struggles, realizing that if these really are cluster headaches, he's only got one last resort, so he taps into his power and a massive magic circle lights up the whole floor. The nun stares at the patterns in total shock. She can't believe he's actually pulling off a spell like this. She mentions that it usually takes a saint a full hour just to set up the formula, and even then, it only works a third of the time, on top of the fact that it burns through an insane amount of mana just to keep it going. The spell is designed to completely wipe away any damage or status problems the target is dealing with, as Hadar focuses everything he's got on this ultimate healing magic. The room fills with a blinding light as he lets out a spell called Absolute B. Cecilia blinks as the glow surrounds her, feeling all that intense pain finally start to fade away. She leans into him with a relieved smile, finally finding peace, now that the agony is completely gone. The massive flash of light finally settles over the church building, signaling that the spell is done. Hadar looks at Cecilia and asks if she's doing okay now. She just smiles and tells him she's great. The nun stands there completely stunned. She can't believe a kid like him can actually use a high-level spell like Absolute Heal. Hadar hears someone calling his name. He turns around looking a bit confused about what's coming next. Turns out all the church staff are bowing down to him. They thank him for stepping in and fixing the mess they couldn't handle. One of them says it should have been their job to help, but Hadar just gets flustered and tells them to please stand up. He tries to play it down by saying he only wanted to help Cecilia, and that he really only did what anyone else would do. He even goes as far as apologizing for overstepping as an intern, which makes the nun think he's way too humble for someone with that much power. She gets all worked up and tells him he must be some kind of incarnation of God. And when Cecilia says she totally agrees, Hadar completely loses it and begs her to stop them before things get even weirder. The church internship finally wraps up and the two of them head out. Cecilia mentions it was a hectic day, but at least the pay was solid, while Hadar just stares at the books he's holding in silence, feeling pretty confused. He wonders why on earth he's stuck with a workbook for the healer exam, since they're basically telling him he needs to go take the test right now. Cecilia points out that passing means he'll get a healer bonus, and honestly, it'll be a total breeze for him. Hadar just sighs and tells her she's only saying that because she's not the one who has to deal with it. While they're walking, Cecilia suddenly calls out to him, and Hadar just looks back and asks what's up. She looks down and apologizes for everything that happened that day, which completely catches Hadar off guard. Hadar tells her she didn't actually do anything wrong, but she insists that's not true at all, because she knows she was teasing him way more than she usually does. Cecilia looks down, sounding a bit down as she admits they just ended up bickering, and she explains she got carried away because it's been so long since they were alone together. Hadar just stands there, heart racing as he watches, but then she moves on to something more important, thanking him from the bottom of her heart for finally curing those cluster headaches she had. She honestly can't believe Hadar was the one who fixed her, since she spent every single day terrified that the pain would just come back at any moment. To her, finally being free of it feels like a dream, and she decides to tell him the real reason she even took this internship, which was because she wanted to help people suffering from the same pain she had. She laughs a bit, realizing that in the end, she's the one who got the most help. Hadar finally gets why she was looking out for him, but Cecilia seems a bit caught off guard by him figuring it out. Cecilia looks back on the entrance exam, telling Hadar he was so kind to her when she was in trouble, and he just brushes it off, saying he couldn't have just left her like that. Hadar stops for a second, a look of suspicion crossing his face, as he realizes he's been getting teased ever since that day. Cecilia starts sweating, trying to tell him it's probably just his imagination while he stares her down. Moving on, Hadar drops the subject and tells her he's just really glad he could save her, making Cecilia look up at him as he starts to explain what she means to him. He gives her a huge, genuine smile and tells her she's a special person to him, leaving Cecilia totally frozen and unable to believe what she's hearing until Hadar clarifies that a first friend is always something special, and Cecilia just loses it after the misunderstanding. Cecilia stands there with her face completely bright red, her heart racing after what he just said, and she finally snaps, yelling at him not to say things that are so easy to take the wrong way. Hadar just shouts back in total confusion because he has no idea what he did wrong. Hadar asks if he said something weird, but Cecilia just turns her back and sighs that he's just being his usual self. He can't believe even she is ganging up on him now, so Cecilia looks down, still blushing like crazy as she repeats the word special to herself. Hadar just gives her a big innocent smile and tells her she's special to both the dragon and himself, but as Cecilia clutches her chest, she realizes that for her, that word means something else entirely. She walks ahead while Hadar tries to keep up, thinking to herself about how her version of special is a bit different than his, and she looks off into the distance with a soft smile, really hoping that one day she'll have the courage to tell him the truth. Moving on, Hadar notices her face is still red and asks if something is wrong, but she just mutters that this is all his fault, which makes Hadar panic, thinking he somehow messed up his work, while Cecilia just stands there completely drained. Hadar walks down the street feeling completely stunned. He can't believe there's actually a disease out there that high-level healing magic can't touch. Cecilia follows behind him and tries to explain that it isn't really that kind of situation, but Hadar is already in his own head about it. Later at the academy, Seal stands in front of the students by the main gates and announces that today's lesson is finally ready to begin. She tells the class they'll be heading out for some dungeon fieldwork, a real-world test of their magic and sword skills. Seal holds up 3 fingers and explains that this time around, the whole point is to practice fighting together in 3-man teams, which leads to her telling everyone to go ahead and pick their partner. While the other kids start moving, Hadar just stands there looking totally lost and confused. He starts stuttering over his words as the realization hits him. He actually has to go out and form a real party with other people. Hadar starts shaking like crazy, wondering what he's even supposed to do in a situation like this, since growing up with an ancient dragon in the mountains meant he never had to deal with groups. This whole social thing is completely foreign to him, so he thinks about reaching out to his only friends like Cecilia, Jasmine, or even Ian, but he's absolutely terrified that they might say no. Hadar suddenly stops in his tracks as a terrifying thought hits him, his eyes going wide as he imagines Cecilia, Jasmine, and Ian all smiling together. He starts to worry that they probably already teamed up without him, and the more he thinks about it, the more he panics. To him, just asking someone to be his partner feels way more impossible than any magic lesson he's ever had to do. Suddenly, Ian lunges out of nowhere and grabs Hadar in a massive hug, shouting that he's officially secured his partner. Hadar is totally winded but recognizes that pushy energy immediately. Ian laughs and says that's a pretty mean way for Hadar to remember him, but he moves past it quickly. Ian gives a big thumbs up and tells Hadar he needs to be on his team. The invite hits Hadar so hard that he just bursts into tears, shouting that he'd love to join. Ian is completely weirded out by the sudden sobbing and asks if he's okay or if the hug actually hurt him. Hadar just shakes his head and says he's only crying because he's so happy Ian invited him. Ian is genuinely stunned that a simple invite would be enough to make a guy lose it like this. He tries to calm him down, telling him to stop crying while he gives Hadar a friendly pat on the head to settle him. Ian announces that for their final team member, he wants to invite either Jasmine or Cecilia, but Hadar realizes that would mean leaving one of them behind. Jasmine shouts for them to wait and tells them to just calm down for a second, while Hadar looks on completely confused. Another student suddenly jumps in and begs Jasmine to join him, which makes Ian snap back that she's already with them. Jasmine tries to play peacemaker by suggesting a 3-person group, and while the other guys cheer about getting her on their team, Hadar feels totally pushed out of the loop. The guys start bickering over who asked her first, arguing about timing until Jasmine finally loses her cool and screams at them to stop fighting. Ian sighs at how popular she is, and Hadar figures that Jasmine is definitely out of the question now. He realizes there is only one person left they can actually ask, and his eyes wander over to Cecilia. She's standing off to the side by herself, looking pretty anxious as she stares at the ground with a shy blush, clearly hoping someone will come over to talk to her. Hatter stands there completely losing his mind, shocked by everything, and he starts panicking, asking Ian what he's supposed to do now. He finally realizes that Cecilia has actually been dodging him ever since their internship ended, so Ian tries to calm him down by explaining that she isn't avoiding him because she hates him. Hatter just yells back, wanting to know what Ian is even talking about. Ian gets fed up and asks Hatter if his brain has finally turned into pure muscle. Jasmine pipes up from the side, telling Ian he's being way too rude. Jasmine keeps complaining about how rude they are. Meanwhile, the reality is that Hatter was raised by a dragon in the mountains. So the idea of a girl avoiding a guy because she likes him is totally over his head. Jasmine gives a big sigh and tells the guys to just stay put while she goes to grab Cecilia herself. Hatter watches her go, feeling pretty unsure if this is a good idea. A moment later, Cecilia shows up blushing and tells them she heard they needed one more person. She asks if she can join their team, while Jasmine stands there looking extremely proud of herself. Ian watches the scene and thinks that this is exactly the kind of move he'd expect from someone who already has a fiancé, even if her smug face is a bit much. The teacher announces that since everyone finally has their teams picked out, it's time for the whole class to head over to the dungeon area. An untouched forest sits right behind the academy back gate. The group heads deeper into the dense forest surrounding the back gate, and as they take each step further into the woods, they find themselves approaching the entrance of the dungeon that the academy manages, which is surrounded by massive stone structures. Jasmine looks at the area in total awe and says she can't believe there are ruins this cool so close to the academy. Everyone stands there in the silence of the forest, the whole class gathered right in front of the dark entrance, while Hatter looks at the huge building and says it's exactly what he expected from the top academy in the whole kingdom. Lux steps up and tells everyone that any teams ready to go should start their exploration immediately, but he stops them for a second. He says that since he's acting as their chaperone, he needs to give a quick explanation of how the dungeon actually works. He points out the entrance and explains that the place just keeps going down through a bunch of staircases, and mentions that for this run, the students are only allowed to go as far as the 10th floor. Lux finishes the warning by telling them that, obviously, all kinds of monsters are going to show up once they get inside. Lux keeps talking, telling the class that since they all passed the entrance exam, the monsters inside shouldn't be too much for them to handle, but he still warns them not to get sloppy. He then tells everyone to get moving and start the exploration. Just as the groups start to go, Lux calls out to Hatter and his teammates, telling them to wait up for a second. Seal steps in and drops some news, telling Hatter that he's actually forbidden from helping out in the fights. Hatter can't believe it and asks why, but Lux reminds him of how badly he got wrecked by Hatter back during the swordsmanship exam. Seal makes it clear that if Hatter fights, the other two won't learn anything, leaving Hatter standing there feeling pretty defeated. She lays out the new ground rules, explaining that Hatter is strictly stuck with strategy, coaching, and scouting duties. Jasmine and Cecilia are totally on board and shout that they don't mind, even though Hatter tries to yell his own objection. Seal adds that he can only step in if their lives are on the line, but Lux warns the girls that if a Hatter has to save them because they were being dumb, they'll lose points, while Hatter realizes he's just being ignored. Hatter decides that if the girls are okay with the arrangement, he'll just go along with it since Jasmine suggests they should probably nail down everyone's roles before the real dungeon crawling starts, which Lux totally agrees with. Cecilia mentions she'd rather stick to the back as the rear guard, while Jasmine's already calling the front lines for herself. Jasmine gives a quick thumbs up and officially labels Hatter as their scout, and Hatter just laughs, knowing he doesn't really have a choice. Cecilia stands there looking pretty confused by how fast things are moving. Lux points out that without Hatter fighting, it's basically a two-person team, so Seal worries that the girls might need a bit of an edge to keep things fair. Lux suggests hooking them up with better weapons, and Seal thinks that's a perfect plan, so Lux brings up Ian, saying a guy with that much strength needs a heavy warhammer that can do way more damage than a sword. He then looks at Cecilia's skills and decides an easy-to-handle dagger sword would be a much better fit for her, telling Hatter to get to work and craft one, though he warns him not to make the thing too overpowered. Hatter is pretty stressed out, yelling about how everyone is just dumping all the crafting work on his shoulders, but he gets it done anyway, slamming a massive stone-headed hammer down onto the dungeon floor to show it's ready. Jasmine picks up the heavy weapon and is totally blown away, telling Hatter his alchemy is exactly as good as she expected, shouting that it's the best hammer she's ever seen, which makes Hatter feel a lot better as he tells her he's just glad she likes it. Moving on, Hatter checks in with Cecilia to see how her new gear turned out while she stares at her glowing blade. and she thinks it's absolutely perfect since it's light enough for her to handle without any trouble at all. Hatter points out that the knife is actually a projectile too, and Cecilia is hyped about having something so versatile. But even though Hatter apologizes for not doing more, Jasmine and Lux tell him he's already done way more than enough for the team. Now that the gear is sorted, Hatter turns his focus toward his actual job as the group's scout, using his detection magic to see every enemy through the walls. But he's not sure how to explain that to the girls without sounding crazy. Hatter suddenly realizes he has the perfect way to share his detection magic, slamming his fist into his palm as he shouts that he's got it. Before Jasmine or Cecilia can even ask what's up, a blinding flash of light fills the room, forcing them to shield their eyes from the glare. A massive glowing map shows up on the wall, revealing the whole floor. Jasmine is completely floored and asks what the hell she's even looking at, while Cecilia guesses it's a map, and Hatter tells her she's right on the money. Hatter explains he used light magic to project the layout and every enemy position, leaving the girls looking totally exhausted by his crazy skills. As Hatter keeps talking, the girls can only think about how he just casually did something impossible again. But they don't have much time to overthink it because Hatter points to a set of icons on the grid, telling them that those markers represent their current location in the hall. He shows them exactly where the stairs are on the map, and Cecilia realizes that's where they need to head if they want to move on. Hatter keeps going, explaining that the 3 different shapes on the grid are actually live markers for enemy positions, making it so they can see every threat ahead of time, especially since the different designs tell them exactly how strong each monster is. Hatter breaks down the map's ranking system, explaining that a single circle represents the average strength for this floor, while the power levels go from simple triangles all the way up to double circles, which Jasmine thinks is super easy to follow. Hatter points out that if they use his map to plan their moves, they can get through the whole place without taking any risks. Cecilia can't believe a scout is doing all this extra work, but Hatter interrupts to let them know a weak enemy is already closing in. The 2 girls immediately stop talking and focus on the path ahead, waiting for a small pack of goblins to jump out of the shadows and start charging them. Jasmine just shrugs it off, saying a few goblins are basically just a warm-up for what's coming later. She's actually hyped to finally test her hammer in a real fight, while Cecilia draws her blade and promises to cover her. Hatter waves and tells them to have a good fight, even though he's secretly pretty jealous that he has to stay back. With the intel Hatter provided, Jasmine doesn't hesitate. She lets out a yell and brings her hammer down on the first monster. With the map guiding them, the group finds that exploring the dungeon has become incredibly easy, and the progress is so smooth that Hatter starts crying, begging them to let him do something too. Moving on, the group reaches the 10th floor of the dungeon and finds a giant map waiting for them. So Jasmine mentions how she can't believe they got to the deepest floor in less than 30 minutes. Cecilia agrees and says she expected this from Hatter, since his help makes a massive difference even if he doesn't fight. However, she notices something is a little off with their guide, and Cecilia realizes that Hatter is basically having withdrawals because he's so desperate to kill some monster. Jasmine is low-key freaked out as Hatter keeps muttering about how much he wants to use his magic, but then Hatter senses some enemies close by, so Jasmine tells the girls to get ready to meet them head-on. A massive swarm of goblins appears in the corridor, and the girls realize they're in for a real fight this time. Jasmine spots a massive monster standing out from the crowd and yells that there's a big one mixed in, while Cecilia takes a look and realizes it's a goblin lord, a mid-rank threat that's way tougher than the rest. So Hatter locks eyes with the beast, figuring out that this guy is the boss leading the entire pack. Hatter steps out in front of the girls and gets into a fighting stance, looking totally ready for action as he yells out that this monster is on a whole different level compared to anything they've seen today. The kid is actually getting hyped, asking the girls if this is finally his big moment to show off, but Jasmine and Cecilia give him a look that shuts him down instantly, telling him to stay back while he just nervously agrees. The Goblin Lord lets out a signal and the entire swarm starts rushing forward, weapons swinging as they surround the 2 girls, but Jasmine and Cecilia don't even flinch at the sight of the horde. Jasmine shouts for Cecilia to get moving, and the 2 of them prepare to dive straight into the middle of the fight. Cecilia gives a confident nod and says she's ready to go, and then she puts her hands out to cast an enchant spell, yelling for a physical body buff to strengthen Ian Sergius. So the prince gets this huge grin on his face and says he can feel the power just overflowing out of him. He doesn't waste a second and sprints right into the middle of the room, heading straight for the goblins while Ian grips his hammer as hard as he can, preparing for a massive hit. The impact is huge. He slams the ground and sends the entire pack of monsters flying through the air. But one of the goblins manages to sneak up behind him and raises its weapon for a surprise attack. Hatter sees the whole thing from the sidelines and realizes that Ian is in a serious pinch, Yet the kid hesitates because he knows if he steps in to help, the girls will lose points on their exam. Hadar starts to prep a spell anyway, but then he sees Cecilia is already ahead of him. She's calling out an aerial spell to handle it. Cecilia fires off her dagger shot, sending the blade flying with a trail of magic behind it, and the goblin just stands there frozen as the attack comes in. Hadar watches her with this huge grin, calling out her name. He's totally impressed and says she's doing exactly what he expected. Cecilia doesn't even flinch, standing her ground while she explains how she realized the weapon could work as a projectile. She's got this serious look on her face, and then she yells for Ian to move in now that the opening is there. She mentions how she used her magic to boost the dagger's speed, so Ian Sergius shouts back that she really saved his life there. He's ready to turn things around, but it's Jasmine who steps up next, gripping her massive hammer and facing down the monster that tried to get the drop on them. Her eyes lock onto the target with this crazy intense focus, like she's already finished the fight in her head, and she lets out a huge yell, swinging her hammer with everything she's got and slamming it right into the goblin's gut. The impact is brutal, and she follows through on the swing to make sure the monster stays down for good. Jasmine finishes her massive dynamic driver move, slamming the goblin so hard into the stone wall that it actually cracks, and the monster just slumps there along with the rest of the pile. Jasmine yells yay while high-fiving Cecilia, feeling pretty good about how they're working together. Jasmine says they're perfectly in sync, and Cecilia jokes that it's nice they're coordinated for more than just teasing her. But the fight took a lot out of them, and Jasmine admits that last one was actually pretty tiring, though Hadar is still hyped and says he's coming along. He offers to use a perfect heal to fix them right up, but Cecilia just sighs and says that's definitely going to be another point deduction. Hadar ends up slumped on the floor, totally bummed out about his magic, while Cecilia checks the map and realizes there's a high-rank enemy nearby. Jasmine isn't backing down though. She grips her hammer and says they might as well go ahead and take that one down too. The stone hallways of the dungeon stay quiet for a second as they move deeper into the maze, eventually stopping in front of a huge glowing map to get their bearings. Cecilia asks if the signal is supposed to be right here, and Hadar confirms he's sure of it, just as Jasmine spots something ahead. Jasmine spots a dark shape further down the hallway and asks if that's the shadow they saw, so Cecilia suggests getting a closer look. But as they step forward, Cecilia stops dead in her tracks. Hadar looks over as she starts to realize that something is seriously wrong. She breaks into a cold sweat, wondering out loud if the monster is what she thinks it is, and just then, the creature growls, showing off rows of sharp, nasty teeth. Jasmine asks if it's a floor boss as they face down the abyss lizard, a super fast monster that's over 3 meters long. Cecilia notices the lizard has that same weird display they saw on the last monster, which makes things even worse. Jasmine mentions this kind of monster is only supposed to show up once every 50 years, and Cecilia starts shaking, saying there's no way they can actually win a fight against something like this. Jasmine loses her cool too, yelling that she has no clue what's even happening with the dungeon anymore, leaving Hadar standing there just watching them, feeling bad about how terrified his friends have become. Hadar stands there with his head spinning. He starts thinking he might have seriously messed things up this time. Meanwhile, over on the 10th floor, Seal is out doing her usual rounds when she stops, noticing that something feels off. She mentions that being on patrol is fine, but it's really weird that there isn't a single student anywhere on the floor. Suddenly, something catches her eye, a small glint on the ground near the stone pillars. She leans down and picks up a dark, shimmering scale. Just looking at it makes her blood run cold, and she realizes she has to dig deeper into what's going on immediately. Back in the hallway, the massive abyss lizard towers over the group and lets out a deafening roar. Hadar looks at how terrified his friends are and starts to freak out, wondering if he somehow caused all this, while Jasmine yells that they're in way over their heads. She asks if this is a monster they were never even meant to face. Cecilia explains that this is the abyss lizard, a legendary beast so strong it's called a once-in-a-generation disaster. Cecilia is shaking like a leaf as the reality of the situation hits, and Hadar looks just as stressed while asking if the monster is really that much of a threat. Hadar is totally baffled, wondering how they could have missed something as huge as a legendary magical beast being right there in front of them, and then the reason starts to click. It all comes down to the math. Since the baseline was set using the median instead of a different calculation, the readings were totally skewed. If they had just used the average in a place where the ratio of monsters was low, the data would have actually shown the chance of a super strong monster being around, because the median strength goes up the stronger an individual gets. Facing down the giant lizard, Jasmine yells that she doesn't give a damn about their grades anymore and begs to know if there's anything that can be done. The girls apologize for being so reckless with the situation, but they tell Hadar that he's the only one left who can help them out of this. Lux points out that while the teacher gave them permission to act, exceptions only count if they're actually about to die. He warns them that if this was just them being careless, they're definitely losing points. Hatter speaks up and says that since he agreed to be the scout, he won't let them take a hit to their grades because of his mistake. Hatter looks at the massive beast with a determined face and tells his friends they need to forget about the combat part for a moment. Hadel realizes he's in a tight spot since his defense and interference magic are totally off-limits, and the rules say he can only handle strategy and scouting, which isn't great when the giant lizard slams its massive claws into the dirt right in front of him. The beast lunges, and Hadel has to scramble back to avoid getting shredded, making him realize that he might have to ignore the rules and just use force to survive this. He starts to reach out, but then he stops himself. He realizes there might be one other way to handle this without breaking the exam rules. He thinks about a specific type of magic. He knows something that might actually work on a creature like this, so he just starts talking to it. He asks the lizard if it can actually hear him, which clearly catches the monster off guard. The creature's huge eye snaps open and focuses right on the tiny human. The beast stands tall, dwarfing Hadel as he stands his ground. The giant lizard leans down, getting right in his face to see what he wants. The giant lizard is completely losing it, stuttering out something about a cow in total fear as it drops its head to the floor, screeching and bowing down to Hadel while Cecilia just watches from the side, totally freaked out by what she's seeing. Cecilia and the muscular girl both start screaming, having no clue what's actually happening right now, and honestly Hadel realizes that having a normal talk with this thing might be impossible if it's this scared. But at least it seems like the lizard gets what he's saying. He smiles a bit, thinking about how he never expected this specific skill to actually be useful in a place like this. He remembers back to when he was younger, asking the ancient dragon about something called dragon's intimidation. She explained to him that it's actually a type of magic used to communicate with monsters, and by speaking draconic and pumping it full of mana, he could make any dragon-type monster realize how much stronger he is. Young Hadel thought it was cool, but admitted he still liked the feeling of just wiping them out with a dragon flash, leaving the ancient dragon a bit speechless. Back in the memory, the ancient dragon tells Hatter that he'll never actually be the strongest in his life, and Hatter asks why, so she smugly explains it's because she's the one who holds that title, but moving back to the present, she brags about winning without a fight. Hatter thinks the communication is amazing, and he turns back to the abyss lizards to give them a serious warning. The lizard chirps back as Hatter puts on a massive display of power, ordering the monsters to never touch any human who enters this floor. He makes it an official order to yield the way immediately, and the lizard bows down, promising to obey. Hatter smiles, thinking about how there might be other people visiting this floor later on, so he explains that this will keep everyone safe. He tells the monsters to finally stand up, but then the prince and Cecilia are just standing there in the background, completely stunned by the display. The two of them are shaking and sweating, totally losing it after seeing Hatter talk to a monster like that. The abyss lizard lets out a tiny noise as it prepares to follow orders, and it suddenly screams and takes off at full speed, leaving a massive trail of dust behind while the group watches. Hatter finally takes a second to breathe, letting out a big sigh of relief now that it's over. He laughs and mentions how the monster just bolted after he talked to himself for a bit, so he rubs his head and suggests they just pretend that whole weird encounter didn't even happen. Hatter points the way forward and says they should keep moving, but Ian and Cecilia are totally losing it. Ian demands to know what he did this time, while Cecilia asks how they can just ignore something that crazy, and they both scream for a real explanation, making Hatter think that his friends are actually way scarier than any dragon. Somewhere else in the dungeon, Jasmine stands alone wondering if she was just imagining things, or if an actual lizard outbreak is happening, which would mean all the students' lives are in serious danger. Teacher Seal watches a griffin from a distance, thinking to herself that she has to make sure that past griffin disaster never happens again, especially since a massive scaly tail suddenly slams into the floor right behind Jasmine. The whole hallway shakes as she stands there completely frozen. She tries to keep her cool, telling herself that those monsters were definitely real and she wasn't just seeing things. While back with the main group, the muscular girl and Cecilia are standing over Hatter, looking like they've officially run out of patience with his excuses. Hatter stays on the ground and tries to play it off, insisting he was really just talking to himself and nothing weird was going on. But Cecilia isn't buying it at all, asking how he can say that after what they saw, while the muscular girl tells him he was being a total weirdo. She yells at him, pointing out that the abyss lizard was literally bowing down to him and shaking like it was terrified. It basically tucked its tail and ran away for no reason. But just as they're getting into it, the lizard monster bursts right back into the room with a massive crash. Everyone stops dead in their tracks as it screams. The muscular girl loses her mind, yelling about how the thing actually came crawling back with its tail between its legs, and now the whole group is just losing it. The abyss lizard is flat on the floor, totally giving up in front of everyone. Hadar completely loses it, shouting for the professor while looking like he's in major trouble. Professor Seal looks at him with this tired expression, asking if this is all his fault again. Hadar stammers as he tries to explain the situation, but he's barely getting the words out. The muscular girl asks if the monster really ran because Hadar used dragon magic to keep it back. Cecilia asks if the lizard was banned from touching people, and Hadar says yeah while the others keep guard. Hadar asks why she won't just trust them, making Seal snap back that she was definitely doing her job Seal size, saying honor students are basically problem kids when they go too far, which shocks Cecilia. Cecilia asks about their grades, but the muscular girl tells her to just let it go for now. Seal admits the monster was a total surprise, so she's just happy Hadar kept everyone safe. Professor Seal gives a thumbs up, trying to act like she's in control by saying that no matter how it happened, she's taking the win. Cecilia just lets out a relieved laugh, mentioning she's mostly just happy their grades are still safe after all the chaos. As Seal starts thinking about how to get rid of the lizard, Hadar steps in to remind her that he's already got the thing under control. So Seal looks back at him and explains it's not about whether she trusts him or not, she just can't leave a monster like that running around. But then Cecilia and the muscular girl start yelling that something is definitely wrong. A dark, scary voice suddenly comes from the lizard, calling them pathetic humans for thinking they could make a fool of it. The monster stands up on two legs, looking way more buff and dangerous while swearing that nobody is leaving the dungeon alive. Everyone is just standing there in shock, looking at the creature like they can't believe it's actually talking to them. Without warning, a massive blade swings through the air, but Seal manages to grab the kids and jump back just in time to keep everyone from getting hit. She asks if they're all okay, and Cecilia quickly replies that they're fine. Hadar stands there with his mouth hanging open, completely shocked by the cut on Seal's back. He yells out to her, but she just says it's nothing serious, even though she's looking pretty intense now. She tells everyone they need to stay alert because huge monsters are starting to close in, like this orc carrying a massive blade, and it's not just him. Seal and Hadar find themselves right in the middle of a crowd of goblins and monsters, leaving Cecilia and the muscular girl to pull out their weapons and get ready for a real fight. The whole room is actually filled with enemies, circling the group from every single side. The muscular girl starts to panic, yelling about how there are way too many of them, so Cecilia explains that the lizard wasn't just running away earlier, he was actually gathering all these minions from across the floor to trap them here. Knowing he's got them cornered, the lizard boss just stands there and laughs. The lizard floor boss thinks that if he personally threatens the group, his army will follow, so he roars out, watching as a massive wave of goblins and lamias finally starts moving. Hadar stands there unfazed, noting that while some are frozen by his dragon's aura, these guys are different. He looks them in the eye and says he'll keep his promise to let them through, but he won't be stepping on their corpses. He says it's time to go and reaches his hand out, signaling that the real fight is starting just as the boss yells for everyone to attack, sending the whole horde charging forward at once. Hadar calmly looks over at Seal and asks if they can treat this whole mess as a special case, and she smiles back, agreeing totally as he asks her to lend him her strength for this next part. The students lock in and give him a loud, "Yes, sir," fully ready to back him up, leaving the four of them standing back to back as the entire room of monsters closes in from every side. The goblin laughs, thinking they have the upper hand since they're only facing low-level threats, but the lamia realizes too late that Hadar's magic is actually the fastest way to end this fight. Hadar shouts for heaven's calling and raises his hand, calling down massive pillars of light that slam into the monsters. But instead of screaming, the creatures start making weirdly happy noises. Cecilia watches the whole thing and feels pretty grossed out, noting that they actually look happy, which makes the other students wonder if Hadar is accidentally using healing magic on them. Seal shuts that idea down fast, explaining it's actually a high-level death spell that turns people into light, and the only reason they look so satisfied is because the spell makes them feel incredible while they're being erased. She leans her head on her hand, admitting she knew he was crazy, but seeing him target a whole crowd is just way too much, leaving the floor boss staring in total shock because the whole situation is impossible. The floor boss is staring at the empty space where its army used to be. Hadar just wiped out half of them in one go, and the rest of the group is ready to jump in. Ian thanks him while Cecilia offers to mop up the rest, but Hadar tells them it's fine. He explains that these monsters only gathered because they were being bullied by the boss, so if you scare them even worse, they'll just bail. Sure enough, the lamia and the others start running for their lives, making Seal think Hadar is just a total musclehead. Hadar walks right up to the lizard boss and calls him pathetic, leaving the monster completely stunned. He keeps going, telling the boss that while he might be able to force a big crowd together, there isn't any real loyalty there. It's nothing like the bond Hadar has with his friends, and he turns back to Professor Seal with a serious look. He tells her he actually learned something pretty important today, shouting it out for everyone to hear. He's realized that even if you can talk to someone, some people are just impossible to reason with. The boss lizard absolutely loses its mind, screaming about being looked down on by a kid. Seeing things go south, the lizard boss decides to make a strategic retreat, yelling that no kid could ever keep up with his speed. But Hadar isn't about to let him walk away that easily. He points his hand toward the monster and tells him he's the one guy he's definitely catching, shouting for his power to pierce through. He isn't holding anything back now, unleashing a move called the Rapid-Fire Dragon Flash. It's a massive burst of energy that lights up the whole area, slamming directly into the lizard boss before he can even react. The force of the hit triggers a huge explosion that tears right through the dungeon floor. Seal and the girls just stand there with their mouths open, completely floored by the sheer amount of power Hadar just showed off. The lizard boss lets out one last scream as the blast sends him flying through the air like a ragdoll, leaving the long hallway covered in a thick cloud of smoke and dust. As things finally start to quiet down, Cecilia and the others call out to Hadar to make sure he's okay. Cecilia jumps in and grabs Hadar, shouting that she's secured the target. Jasmine is right there with them, cheering as Hadar just stands there looking completely flustered by the sudden hug. The whole group shouts out a huge "thank you for being saved" while Seal watches them from a distance. The girls tell Hadar he's way too reliable, but he just stays humble and says he's happy they're all safe, leading to the whole group finally making it out of the dungeon in one piece. Hadar's team ended up taking the top spot by a landslide, and with that, their first big field trip officially wraps up. Later that night at a big mansion, a voice from inside yells out in total shock about everything that went down in the dungeon. Turns out Jasmine is back home having dinner with her dad, Light. He laughs and says it sounds like Hadar is the same as always, and Jasmine couldn't agree more. She sighs and explains that because Hadar went so hard during the morning session, every monster she ran into that afternoon just turned around and bolted. She complains that it didn't even feel like real training, but her dad just smiles. He tells her she actually looks like she's having a lot of fun lately, making Jasmine blush as she takes a bite of food, quietly admitting that maybe she is. Light sits there thinking about the report, realizing that Hadar isn't just a builder, the kid actually knows how to fight too. And then he suddenly stands up, yelling about a great idea he just had. Jasmine jumps in her seat, totally caught off guard by her dad's energy, but Light just smiles to himself. He's convinced that Hadar might be the only one who can handle a specific problem they've been facing. Turns out there's this massive project that's about to fail. They can't keep the workers safe because monsters have basically taken over the site, and it's a huge deal for the country. Light looks out at the volcano in the distance, thinking about the scale of the job. In the next scene back at the school, Hadar looks pretty confused. He asks if there's really someone there specifically to see him, so Seal brings up that national healer exam he took recently. Hadar just rubs the back of his head and admits he was kind of forced into it, explaining that the school couldn't even give him his reward money unless he had an official healer license. Seal finally gets the full story, but she lets him know that those exam results caught some serious attention. There's someone waiting for him in the VIP room right now, and she warns him to be on his best behavior because this person is a high-ranking official. Hadar just nods nervously, trying to prepare himself. Hadar looks up at the professor and asks what kind of person this visitor actually is. Seal explains that it's the saint of the kingdom of Sergius, a lady named Elizabeth Ramasin. Hadar can't believe what he's hearing and just stares blankly, suddenly losing it as the reality of meeting a saint hits him. He screams out in shock, wondering why someone that important wants to see him, and he frantically asks Seal if she's coming along. She tells him that was the original plan, but turns out the saint specifically asked to speak with him alone. Seal tries to calm him down, mentioning that he's already finished 2 internships and she's seen that his manners are actually perfect, so she just decided to let him go on his own. Hadar immediately yells that her being so casual about this isn't good at all, asking if she's been treating him a bit too carelessly lately. He can't believe she's just throwing him into a meeting with a high-ranking official like it's nothing, so he begs her to think back more carefully on how things have been going. Seal stops to think, remembering how she praised him for handling that abyss lizard situation, and then she asks if all of this is just proof of how much she trusts him. Hadar gets a little flustered, wondering if she really feels that way or if she's just messing with him, but she just tells him to get moving since they're waiting. As a final note, she mentions he got a perfect score on his exam while Hadar walks off still complaining about how reckless she is. Hadar makes it to the door, and the sign confirms he's at the VIP room. He's shaking like a leaf and covered in sweat, looking completely terrified standing there all small in front of those massive doors. He starts wondering what she could possibly want to talk about with just the two of them, and his head starts spinning. He's freaking out, thinking he's in huge trouble or that he accidentally blew it during his internship. But then a voice from inside tells him to come on in. Hatter honestly just wants to run back home right now, but he sucks it up and slowly cracks the door open to announce he's there. The room is huge, and he sees a girl in a white cloak by the window. She hears him and turns around, finally showing him her face, and Hatter is just stunned. He's blushing like crazy, thinking she's the most beautiful person he's ever seen and that she really does look like a saint. She asks if he's Yahello, the one who managed to get a perfect score on that legendary healer exam, and Hatter can barely get a yes out. She gives him a really kind smile and introduces herself as the country's new saint, telling him it's great to finally meet him. The girl gives Hatter a warm smile and introduces herself as Elizabeth Lamensin. She reaches out and grabs his hands, saying she's been looking forward to meeting him, which makes Hatter blush and stammer about how honored he is. Elizabeth explains that while she was visiting a church on her usual pilgrimage, she heard some pretty wild stories about him. She mentions the time he used an absolute heal on a friend having a seizure, and Hatter starts getting all nervous, telling her he was really just acting on pure instinct back then. He keeps going, trying to explain that he was just doing his best to help, but Elizabeth just giggles at how worked up he's getting and tells him he can relax. She says that honestly, she's the one who should probably be acting more formal, which leaves Hatter totally lost. Then she grabs his hand again and tells him this was the main reason she wanted to meet him. Hatter feels a strange sensation as his hand starts acting up just like before.